All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we are going to be diving into Avatar.
Avatar.
The Last Airbender.
Yes.
So this all started from just a simple note, just Avatar.
Yeah.
That was it. That was all it said.
That's all you need sometimes.
And yet look where we are.
Exactly. The simplest prompts can lead to, I think, the most fascinating conversations.
That's so true.
But yeah,
Avatar.
The Last Airbender. It's interesting, I think, right? How such a show with a straightforward premise can still resonate with audiences, even though it's been quite a while since the finale.
Yeah, it's considered phenomenal. It's like one of the top shows. Mm-hmm. And I'm so curious about it.
Yeah.
I mean, have you seen it? Have you seen the show?
I have seen the show, yeah. Big fan.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. So I guess before we really dive in, for those who haven't seen it, it's kind of important to give a little bit of background.
You're like, what is it?
What is it?
When did it come out?
Yeah, so it aired from 2005 to 2008.
Okay.
And the basic premise is imagine a world where people can control the four elements: water, earth, fire, and air.
Yeah.
And they can control it, or as they call it in the show, bend it.
Oh, okay, bend it.
Yeah.
They're like benders?
They're benders, yeah.
Benders of the elements.
Yes. And so the Avatar is the only one who can master all four elements and is tasked with maintaining balance in the world.
Okay, so that's the basic setup. But why?
Yeah.
Why does a show that, you said it aired in the 2000s.
2005.
Why does it still, a decade later?
More than a decade.
Yeah, why does it still resonate with people today?
I think there's a lot of reasons.
Right.
I think first and foremost, the characters.
Okay.
Really well-developed, complex characters.
What do you mean?
Well, I think so often in shows, especially shows that are targeted towards, a younger audience, the characters can sometimes feel a little bit like archetypes. Uh-huh. Right.
This is the good guy, this is the bad guy.
The hero, the villain.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's it.
But in Avatar, I think even the characters who start out seemingly, they're just kind of fulfilling a very basic archetype,
yeah,
they very quickly become much more complex, much more nuanced.
Like who?
A perfect example is Zuko.
Zuko.
Yeah, Prince Zuko.
I've heard that name.
Yeah, so he starts out, he's the banished prince of the Fire Nation, and he's angry, he's vengeful.
Yeah.
He's trying to hunt down the Avatar to regain his honor.
Okay.
So very straightforward, right? Bad guy, essentially, at the beginning.
Yeah, totally.
But as the series progresses, we learn so much about him, about his backstory.
Oh, interesting.
About, the trauma that he's endured.
Oh.
And he really becomes, I think, one of the most interesting and complex and well-developed characters, not just in the show, but in any show.
Really?
I think so.
That's a bold statement.
It is a bold statement.
Okay. I'm intrigued, though.
Yeah, I think that his journey from this vengeful prince to, a redeemed hero is a masterclass in character development.
So it sounds like you're saying it's not black and white with the character.
It's not black and white at all.
It's there's
so much gray area.
Yeah, they're more like real people.
They are, they make mistakes, they have flaws, they have strengths.
Yeah.
And it's that complexity that makes them relatable even all these years later.
We can see ourselves in them.
I think so, yeah. I think we can see ourselves in them. And I think we can see the complexities of guilt and forgiveness and, trying to find your own path in life reflected in these characters.
And so you're saying that's one of the reasons why people still love it.
I think that's a huge part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
I also think the world building is just phenomenal.
Okay, the world building.
So we talked about, this world where people can bend the elements, but the world itself is incredibly rich and detailed.
Like how?
Well, first of all, each of the four nations, the Water Tribes, the Earth Kingdom, the Fire Nation, and the Air Nomads, are all inspired by real-world cultures and societies.
Oh, interesting.
So, for example, the Water Tribes, their architecture, their clothing, their customs are inspired by Inuit and indigenous cultures.
So they really put thought into this.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just random.
Absolutely not. Yeah, it's very intentional and very well researched.
Yeah.
And then the bending itself also kind of reflects those cultural influences.
Really?
Yeah.
So how so?
So for example, water bending is inspired by Tai Chi.
Oh, wow.
So it's very fluid, very adaptable.
Right.
And it's all about redirecting energy.
Interesting.
rather than, brute force.
Oh, so like the bending style almost has its own like personality.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that reflects the water tribe's kind of harmonious relationship with nature.
That's so cool. It's like I love that detail.
I know. Like, it's not just the powers, but it's like there's meaning behind it.
Exactly. And I think, the show also has this really captivating mythology.
Okay, like what?
Well, there's the spirit world.
Spirits.
Yeah. And there are all these, ancient legends and stories about the origins of bending and, the relationship between humans and spirits.
Wow.
And it just creates this really rich and immersive world that, like, even all these years later, I think fans are still finding new things to explore in it.
Okay, well, this is what I find really interesting. So, like, okay, the bending.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Who hasn't imagined themselves controlling the elements?
I know. It's such a cool concept.
It's like, I would want to be a waterbender.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but it's more than just cool powers, right? Like, what are you trying to say?
Well, I think each bending style reflects the character's inner self.
Okay.
In a really interesting way.
So give me an example.
Okay, so let's take firebending.
Okay, fire. It's fueled by strong emotions, right?
Yeah.
Like anger and ambition, and we see this play out in characters like Azula, who's like this really...
Is she a villain?
She's like...
Firebender.
She's definitely an antagonist.
Okay.
Yeah, she's Zuko's sister.
Okay.
And she's a prodigy when it comes to firebending.
So she's like really powerful.
Extremely powerful and very, very dangerous.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, so she's fueled by this like ambition and this need to control everything.
Okay, so like her bending style is like an extension of her personality.
Exactly. Oh. But at the same time, mastering firebending also requires a lot of discipline.
Okay.
A lot of control.
That's interesting.
Yeah, which ultimately reflects the balance that the Avatar is trying to bring to the world.
Okay.
So like even within that one bending style, you have these two sides.
So it's almost like firebending is like its own character in the show, in a way.
I think that's a really interesting way to put it.
Yeah, because like it can be destructive, but also have this like balance.
That's
cool.
It is.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got characters,
yes,
world building, and now bending.
Bending.
And it's like all connected.
It's all connected.
But there's also, the story.
The story got to be good, right?
Yeah, the story is very engaging, and I think one of the things that it does really well is that it balances humor and action with really emotional depth.
Okay. So give me an example. Like, how do they balance all that?
Well, so there's an episode called The Storm.
Okay, The Storm.
And it's early on in this year, I think season 1.
Okay.
And it delves into Zuko's backstory.
Oh, the one we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So we learn about the origins of his scar.
Oh, so they really go into like his past.
Yeah. And why he was banished by his father, the Fire Lord.
So like it's a really emotional episode.
It is very emotional.
Oh, okay.
But it also features, these really incredible action sequences.
With, showcasing the raw power of firebending.
Oh, yeah.
And how it's connected to, inner turmoil and emotional pain.
So, like, even though there's action, it's not just mindless action.
Right. It's always connected to the characters and their emotions.
No, that's good.
Yeah, I think The Storm is a really great example of how Avatar manages to do all of that in one episode.
And, like, is it funny?
Oh, yeah. Avatar can be really funny.
Okay, so they balance that too.
Yeah, they balance it really well. And it's not just, like, slapstick humor.
Right.
It's witty.
Okay.
It's it comes from the characters.
Yeah, that's the best kind of humor, I think.
I agree, and I think that also contributes to why it's so rewatchable.
Oh, okay.
Because you can watch it again and again and still find new things to appreciate, both in the humor and in the emotional depth.
And okay, so like what's the overall message? Like what's the point of Avatar? What are they trying to,
That's a good question. I think Avatar is, at its core, a story about hope.
Okay.
About balance, about finding your place in the world, and about, overcoming adversity.
So, like, everyone can relate to that.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's about, it's about the power of friendship.
Yeah.
And the importance of compassion and understanding.
And fighting for what's right.
And fighting for what's right. Exactly.
Even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard, yeah.
Okay.
And I think those themes are timeless.
Yeah, those are like, they're always relevant, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're relevant today. They were relevant back in 2005.
Yeah.
And they'll be relevant, decades from now.
It's like human nature almost.
I think so, yeah. I think it really taps into something fundamental about, about what it means to be human.
Okay, so like So what? Like, what does this all mean?
What does it all mean?
Yeah, for our listeners, like, why should they care about Avatar?
I think it means that Avatar, The Last Airbender, is more than just a great show. It's a cultural phenomenon that continues to captivate audiences because of its complex characters,
Right.
its intricate world, and its timeless themes.
And it makes you think.
And it makes you think, yeah. I think it really encourages you to think about, the world around you and your place in it.
Yeah.
And the importance of, fighting for what you believe in.
Okay, I love that.
And I think as a final thought, I'll leave you with this. The show introduces this concept of the spirit world.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier.
A realm beyond the physical world where spirits reside. And I think it raises a really interesting question.
Okay.
If you could visit the spirit world, what do you think you would find there? How would you connect with that realm? And what insights might it offer about yourself?
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah, something to think about.
Yeah, it's almost like, what would your spirit world look like?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I like that.
It's amazing to think this show's celebrating its 20th anniversary. And from what I've seen, from what you've shared, it's had a pretty big impact on you.
Oh, definitely. Avatar, it's one of those shows that sticks with you, even after all these years.
Absolutely. In your notes, you even compared the animation style to anime, saying you'd want that look if your books ever got adapted.
Yeah. I mean, if I could, pick any style, I think that'd be it. It's so dynamic and fluid, especially the action sequences, the bending battles,
Yeah, the fight scenes are really something else. You can tell they put a lot of thought into them. It's not just like random punches and kicks.
Right. It's like they took inspiration from anime, definitely, but they also made it their own. They blended it with those amazing visuals inspired by different Asian cultures.
It's like you can really see that in the architecture, the clothing, the landscapes.
Yeah, all those details, they just make the world feel so alive, so believable.
And speaking of details, you mentioned something about the bending styles that really fascinated me. You said it's not just about like shooting fire or water. It's actually rooted in real martial arts philosophies.
Oh, yeah. Like each bending style is based on a specific martial art. Like water bending, for example, based on Tai Chi. It's all about flowing movements, redirecting force, finding harmony.
So it's not just about brute strength. It's about like using your opponent's energy against them.
Exactly. It's almost like a dance,
That's really cool. What about the other elements?
Well, like earthbending, that draws from Hung Gar, a southern Chinese style. It's all about those strong stances, powerful strikes, really grounded.
Which makes sense, right? Earth is all about being solid and unyielding.
Exactly. And then firebending, that takes inspiration from northern Shaolin Kung Fu. Quick, aggressive movements, really reflects that kind of fiery energy.
It's amazing how much thought they put into it. And what about airbending? That always seems so different from the other styles.
It is. And it's based on Bagwasang. It's all about circular movements, being evasive, focusing on speed and agility.
So like the wind, right? Always moving, hard to pin down.
Exactly. It's about outmaneuvering your opponent, using their momentum against them. It's really fascinating.
This level of detail, it really makes the fight scenes so much more engaging. It's not just spectacle. It's like you can actually see the personalities of the benders reflected in their fighting styles.
Yeah, you really get a sense of who they are through how they fight.
And you mentioned this approach to action and world building, that it kind of created a blueprint for other media that came after.
Oh, absolutely. Like The Legend of Korra, for example.
Yeah.
It directly builds on what Avatar established, but it goes beyond that too. Like you see it in films like Kung Fu Panda, where the martial arts are like tied to the animals, even in video games like Genshin Impact.
Yeah.
Where you have those elemental powers and unique fighting styles.
It's like Avatar paved the way for this whole new wave of action fantasy that feels both exciting and grounded in something real.
You could definitely say that. It's pretty amazing to see how much influence it's had.
Okay, so we've talked about the animation, the bending styles. Now let's talk about the characters. In your notes, you specifically mentioned Zuko and Toph from the original series. And, I have to ask, why Toph? Twice you even mention her again when talking about The Legend of Korra. What is it about her character that you connect with so much?
Well, I mean, Toph is just such a fantastic character. She's strong, independent, and funny. And I love how she defies so many stereotypes about, female characters. She's blind, but she's also one of the most powerful earthbenders in the world.
And she's not afraid to speak her mind, right?
Never. She's total unapologetically herself, and I love that about her.
She's definitely a great role model. And Zuko, you mentioned him alongside Toph. His character arc is definitely one of the most compelling compelling parts of the series.
Yeah, his journey is just so relatable, you know. He starts off as this like angry, driven antagonist, but he goes through so much growth and change throughout the series. He really has to confront his inner demons and make some tough choices.
And it's not easy for him. He makes mistakes along the way. He really has to work for his redemption.
Right, and that's what makes it so satisfying to watch.
Yeah.
He doesn't just magically become a good guy overnight. He has to earn it.
And you also mentioned Korra, Bolin, and, well, Toph again from The Legend of Korra. Let's talk about Korra for a moment. You seem to really admire her character, but you also expressed some concern about how she might be portrayed in future content.
Yeah, Korra, she's a very different avatar than Aang. She's more impulsive, more headstrong, and she struggles with the spiritual side of things a lot more. But that's what makes her interesting, you know? She's flawed, but she's also incredibly strong and determined.
She faces a whole new set of challenges, right? Challenges that are unique to her time.
Exactly. And, you know, I hope they continue to portray her with that same depth and complexity in any future stories. She's a character that deserves to be handled with care.
It sounds like there's a lot riding on those future stories. Fans are definitely invested in these characters and how their journeys continue.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a good thing. It shows how much these characters have resonated with people.
Yeah.
And that's pretty special.
Well, speaking of future stories, there is that upcoming movie, right? Set to release in 2026.
Yeah, January 30th, 2026. It feels so far away.
I know, but it's exciting. Not a lot of details out there yet, but we know it's going to follow Aang and his friends as young and old. You even mentioned hoping for a good Israeli dub, which just goes to show how global this fandom is.
It really is amazing, isn't it? How this story has touched so many people from all over the world.
And speaking of continuing the story, you mentioned that you loved The Legend of Korra and would be interested in seeing a potential Avatar after Korra series. Do you think there's room for more Avatar stories?
Definitely. I mean, the world is so rich and expansive. There are so many possibilities. We could delve deeper into the history of bending, explore new cultures, or even follow a brand new avatar.
It seems like the possibilities are endless, but what about the challenges? What are some of the hurdles in, continuing a story with such a beloved set of characters and such a detailed world?
I think one of the biggest challenges is balancing innovation with respect for the existing lore. The fans are passionate and they have high expectations. It's about finding that sweet spot between honoring the past and forging a new path.
It's a delicate balance for sure. But hey, if anyone can pull it off, it's the creators of Avatar. They've proven they can handle this world and its characters with care.
You're right about that.
Okay, so before we get too caught up in the future, let's take a step back and talk about something else you mentioned, the cultural influences behind the series. You specifically pointed to Chinese inspiration. What are some examples of how that's reflected in the show?
Oh, it's everywhere. Like the concept of bending itself is rooted in Chinese philosophy. The idea of qi, or life energy, that flows through all living things.
So bending is more than just manipulating the elements. It's about tapping into that universal energy.
Exactly. It's a really deep concept. And then, the visual design, the architecture, the clothing, even the fighting styles, they all draw heavily from Chinese culture.
You can really see it, especially in the design of the temples, the costumes. It's like a visual love letter to Chinese culture.
And it's done so beautifully. It adds so much depth and richness to the world.
You mentioned finding some videos online that break down these inspirations.
Oh yeah, they're great. I learned so much from them. It really enhances your appreciation for the level of detail and thought that went into creating this world.
It's like peeling back another layer of the onion, right? Revealing even more depth and complexity.
Exactly. That's one of the things I love about Avatar. There's always more to discover.
Yeah.
You
You also highlighted some of the relationships in Avatar, specifically mentioning Korra and Asami from The Legend of Korra. This relationship, it definitely sparked a lot of discussion in the fandom. What are your thoughts on the significance of their relationship and its representation in the show?
Well, for me, it's a really important step forward in terms of LGBTQ plus representation in animation. And I think it was handled really well. It wasn't forced or over the top. It just felt natural, like a real relationship that developed organically.
So it wasn't about checking a box. It was about portraying a genuine connection between two complex characters.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really important, especially when it comes to representing marginalized groups. It's about showing that their stories are just as valid and meaningful as anyone else's.
It's a reminder that representation matters. Everyone deserves to see themselves reflected in the stories they love.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive so far. We've covered the animation, bending styles, the characters, the cultural influences, even touched on representation. It's clear that Avatar has a lot to offer on so many levels.
It really does. It's a show that stays with you long after you've finished watching it.
And speaking of staying with you, you mentioned putting together playlists of your favorite Avatar moments. Can you tell us about some of the scenes that stand out to you as particularly memorable or impactful?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There are so many. But one that always gets me is Zuko's Agni Kai against Azula in the series finale.
Oh, that's a classic. So visually stunning and so emotionally charged.
Right. It's like the culmination of his entire character arc. All that tension and conflict just like explodes in that scene.
It's definitely a moment that stays with you. What about you? What are some of your other favorite moments?
Well, another one that comes to mind is Toph's introduction in the second season. The way she just casually takes down those earthbenders in the underground fighting ring.
Oh, yeah. That's such a badass introduction. It's like, here's this tiny blind girl, and she can take on anyone.
And she knows it. That confidence, it's just amazing.
And then there's that scene where Aang enters the Avatar state for the first time to save Katara from Zuko.
Oh, that scene gives me chills every time. You can really feel the raw power of the Avatar state.
And it's such a turning point for Aang. It's like he finally understands the true weight of his responsibility as the Avatar.
And it's just the beginning of his journey.
We'll have to talk more about those journeys and those incredible moments in part 2 of our deep dive. But for now, I want to encourage everyone listening to think about their own favorite Avatar moments. What are the scenes that stick with you? What are the characters that you connect with the most? We'll be back soon to explore those ideas and delve even deeper into this amazing world.
Can't wait. Welcome back. It's great to jump back into Avatar with you. Before the break, we were talking about some of your favorite moments, and it sounds like you really connect with those scenes where the characters are, facing tough choices, really having to dig deep.
You're right. Those moments are definitely what stand out for me too. It's not just about the action. It's those moments of internal conflict, of growth. When the characters make mistakes but learn from them, that's what really makes a story stick with you.
Definitely. It makes them feel so real, like people we can actually relate to.
And speaking of relating to characters, you mentioned being really interested in representation in Avatar, especially LGBTQ plus representation. And I know you also expressed some concerns about how Korra's character might be handled in the future.
Yeah, I do worry a bit about that, honestly. But I think representation is so important, It's about seeing yourself reflected in the stories you love and feeling like your experiences are valid, like they matter.
It's about feeling seen and heard.
Yeah, exactly. Especially for groups that are often, marginalized or misrepresented. It can be really powerful to see someone like you on screen.
And you touched on Korra and Asami's relationship, which has definitely been a big topic of conversation in the fandom. How do you feel about the way their relationship was portrayed in the show?
I think they did a really good job, all things considered. It wasn't like rushed or anything. It felt natural, like it developed organically over time.
It wasn't just thrown in there for shock value or anything.
Right. And I think that's important to show that these relationships are just as valid and complex as any other relationship.
And that they're not just defined by their identity, right? They're whole people with their own stories.
Exactly. And I know some people have said that their relationship was only implied and not explicitly shown. And, that's true to an extent. But I think they did the best they could at the time. And that final scene with Korra and Asami walking into the spirit world together, that spoke volumes.
That scene was definitely powerful. And since then, the creators have confirmed that they are a couple.
Exactly. And I think that's a testament to the progress we've made, even if it's slow sometimes. It's important to keep pushing for more diversity and inclusivity in the stories we tell.
Absolutely. Because representation really does matter. It can shape how we see the world and how we see ourselves.
Yeah, that's really well said.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the broader impact of Avatar. You mentioned seeing its influence in other media like movies, shows, even video games.
Oh, yeah. It's really cool to see how it's inspired other creators, like The Legend of Korra, obviously, but also things like Kung Fu Panda, where the martial arts are tied to the animals. Even games like Genshin Impact, with its elemental powers and different fighting styles.
It's like Avatar created a whole new vocabulary for how to tell these kinds of stories.
Definitely. It showed that you can have action and adventure, but also these really deep themes of well-developed characters.
And speaking of the future, there's that new Avatar movie coming out, even though we don't know much about it yet. What are you hoping to see in the film?
I'm really hoping they'll delve deeper into the world, explore some of the history and mythology that we haven't seen yet. And I'm excited to see how Aang and his friends have grown and changed since the end of the series.
It'll be interesting to see how they handle those characters as young adults facing a whole new set of challenges.
Yeah, exactly. And what about you? You mentioned mentioned being interested in an Avatar after Korra series. What kind of stories would you like to see in that?
Well, I think it would be fascinating to see a story set several generations after Korra. See how the world has changed, what new technologies have emerged, what new challenges the Avatar might face.
And new characters too, right? It would be amazing to see a whole new cast of characters who are carrying on the legacy of the Avatar.
And exploring those themes of balance and harmony in a whole new context.
That's what I love about the Avatar world. There's just so much potential.
You've clearly given this a lot of thought. It's great to see how passionate you are about Avatar and where the story could go. But before we get too carried away with the future, let's take a moment to appreciate the present. You talked about having these playlists of your favorite Avatar moments. Can you share some of the scenes that have really stuck with you?
Well, one that always gets me is from the Southern Raiders episode. It's when Zuko confronts his mother's assassin.
Oh, that scene is so intense.
It is, and it's not just about revenge, it's about forgiveness. Zuko chooses to let go of that anger and hatred, realizing that it would just destroy him in the end.
It's a powerful message about moving on and healing.
Exactly. And it just shows how Avatar can handle these really complex themes with such sensitivity.
So what other scenes stand out for you?
Another one I love is from The Guru, when Aang learns about the chakras.
That episode is so visually stunning.
It is. And it really delves into the spiritual side of the Avatar world. The idea that true power comes from within, that you have to let go of earthly attachments to master the Avatar state.
It's really powerful stuff. What about from The Legend of Korra? Any scenes that come to mind?
Oh, definitely. One that I keep going back to is from Venom of the Red Lotus. It's when Zahir poisons Korra.
Oh, wow. That scene is brutal.
It is, and so unexpected. It really shows how dangerous the Red Lotus is. But it's also a huge turning point for Korra. She's forced to confront her own mortality, and it leads to that amazing scene where she connects with Aang in the spirit world.
That scene is visually breathtaking and so emotionally powerful. It's like even in her darkest moments, she finds hope and healing.
And that's what Avatar is all about, right? Finding hope, even when things are tough. It's a show that really stays with you.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, you mentioned the importance of community in the Avatar fandom. You've connected with other fans online, and you've talked about finding a real sense of belonging in those spaces.
Oh, definitely. The Avatar fandom is just so welcoming, It's a place where you can geek out over your favorite characters and moments, share fan art and theories, and really dive deep into the themes and messages of the show.
It's amazing how a show can bring people together like that.
It really is. And the fandom is so diverse. There are people from all over the world, from all walks of life, who love Avatar. It just shows how universal these stories are, how they can speak to everyone.
It's like even though we come from different backgrounds and experiences, we can all connect through this shared love of Avatar.
And find a place where we belong. It's really special.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on for this part of our dip dive. We've talked about representation, the impact of Avatar, the future of the story, and even the importance of community.
I know, it's been a great conversation.
We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of the Avatar universe and its lasting legacy. But until then, keep those Avatar conversations going and stay connected with your fellow fans. And we're back for the final part of our Avatar deep dive.
It's really incredible how much there is to talk about with this show. We could probably go on for days.
Seriously, and we've only scratched the surface. It's amazing how much depth and heart they packed into this show. We've covered the animation, the bending styles, the characters, all those amazing details that make the world so believable. But there's one thing we haven't really dug into yet, something you mentioned in your notes about how Avatar helped you through some difficult times.
Yeah, it sounds kind of strange, right? Like a cartoon helping you with real-life problems.
Well, sometimes the stories we connect with the most, even the fictional ones, can have a real impact on us.
That's true. And for me, Avatar, it was like this beacon of hope, especially when things were tough.
It sounds like you really resonated with Aang's story. This kid who's suddenly thrust into this huge responsibility, this whole world depending on him.
Exactly. He was so young, facing all this pressure, but he never gave up. He was always optimistic, always believed in people. And that really inspired me, It reminded me that even when things seem impossible, there's always hope.
It's like his strength gave you strength.
Yeah, in a way it did. And it wasn't just to Aang. Zuko's story too, his whole journey of redemption, that really spoke to me.
His character arc is definitely one of the best in the show.
I think so too. He starts off so angry and lost, but he goes through so much growth. And it's not easy for him. He makes mistakes, he struggles, but he eventually finds his way. And that gave me hope, like even if you mess up, it's never too late to change, to become a better person.
It's a message that resonates with a lot of people. And Toph too, right? You mentioned how much her character inspired you.
Oh yeah, Toph's amazing. She's blind, but she's so strong and independent. She doesn't let anything hold her back. And I love that about her, She taught me to embrace my own individuality, to not be afraid to be myself.
She's a great role model model for sure. You know, it's amazing to me how these characters, these fictional stories, can teach us so much about life.
It's true. They give us these lessons wrapped up in these incredible adventures.
And it's not just the individual characters, right? Avatar as a whole promotes these bigger themes like balance, harmony, the idea that we're all connected.
Yeah, totally. Like the four elements working together. That's such a powerful metaphor for how we should strive to live, you know, finding balance within ourselves and with each other.
And respecting different cultures and perspectives.
Oh, definitely. The Avatar world is so diverse, and it celebrates that diversity. It shows us the beauty of different cultures and how we can learn from each other.
It's a message that's really important, especially in today's world.
Couldn't agree more. It's one of the things that makes Avatar so timeless, so relevant. It's a story that speaks to everyone, no matter who you are or where you come from.
And it's a reminder that even though these are fictional worlds, they can still teach us so much about the real world and about ourselves. They can give us hope, inspire us to be better people, and help us connect with each other.
And that's something really special.
It really is.
Okay, so we're diving into Azula.
Oh, yeah.
From Avatar.
Buckle up.
She is fascinating.
One of the most complex characters, I think, on the show.
Definitely.
Okay.
I've got 3 videos today, all sort of tackling her psychology from different angles.
Yeah, we've got like almost 3 hours of content here.
So this is going to be a really interesting one.
It's going to be a deep dive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm excited.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is really interesting about Azula is that there is this sort of knee-jerk reaction to label her as a psychopath.
Right.
But I think these videos do a really good job of kind of saying, well, hold on a second. Let's not jump to any conclusions.
Yeah, it's much more nuanced than that. Like, she's a fascinating character study in trauma. Like, it's really like the Ozai parenting method, like in action to a T.
Yeah. And so the Hello Future Me video really dives into that. And they highlight these 4 personality traits that sort of come to define Azula as a character.
Yeah, calculating, lack of empathy, and manipulative and sadistic.
Yeah. And it's not just that they're telling us these things.
Right.
They're showing us through clips.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking of the scene when Azula finds out about Lu Ten's death.
Yeah, she's just calculating, like, what this means for her.
Yeah, that's like, there's no...
And how it shifts the power dynamic.
Yeah, there's no, like, comforting her uncle.
No.
It's just like, oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
This changes things.
It's chilling to see a 14-year-old be so cold-hearted.
Yeah.
Like that.
And so that kind of brings up the question, like, is this psychopathy or is it something else?
Right. And that's where this idea of Machiavellianism comes in,
right.
Which, you know, Hello Future Me talks about. And like Azula is like a master strategist.
Yeah, she's playing 4D chess while everybody else is playing checkers.
Absolutely. And she uses people's weaknesses against them to get what she wants. And like she's willing to wait years to get what she wants.
Like framing Zuko for Oang's death.
Exactly. Yeah, that was a long con.
Yeah.
It demonstrates a willingness to sacrifice like immediate gratification for power later.
Totally.
Down the road.
And she's not just manipulating her enemies, she's manipulating her friends too.
Yeah.
Like
the beach volleyball scene.
Yes, the beach volleyball scene
is a great example.
It is such a perfect microcosm of her character.
Her personality.
It's like this seemingly innocent game of volleyball.
Right.
And she just turns it into this like
power struggle.
Abomination.
Yeah.
And she's so effective.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that she was able to fool Toph's seismic sense.
I know.
When they were trying to infiltrate the Fire Nation during the Day of Black Sun.
I know. The greatest earthbender in the world.
Yeah.
Could not see through her facade.
Yeah.
It speaks to Azula's level of control over her emotions.
Yeah.
And her ability to just like project an image that she wants people to see.
So Machiavellianism, how does that relate to the clinical diagnoses that we see in these videos?
Well, it's not a clinical diagnosis.
Right.
It's a personality type. But Hello Future Me does point out that she could potentially meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, which is ASPD.
Yeah, ASPD.
And that, you know, there's a lot of...
And she checks a lot of those boxes.
She does, but the impulsivity thing...
Yeah, she's not impulsive.
She's very calculated.
Right, exactly.
And so then they also talk about narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay.
And like the fact that she needs...
constant validation.
Yeah, this validation and believes in her own superiority.
It's interesting, though, because there's this very specific type of approval she's looking for from Ozai.
Right.
And then there's a very different type of approval that she's looking for from her friends.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not the same.
No.
Like with Ozai, it's like she needs to be powerful
and
perfect.
Yes.
And the best.
To gain his love. which he doles out so rarely.
Yeah, and with her friends, it's like she needs to be admired.
Yes.
And feared.
Yeah, it's all about power dynamics for her.
So like in the beach party episode,
Oh, yeah.
she's genuinely puzzled as to why boys aren't like flocking to her.
Right, and Tylee's like,
you're the most beautiful.
you're the smart.
You're amazing. Perfect girl.
Yeah, and Azula's like, well, yeah, obviously.
I mean,
You're right about all those things.
it's tragicomic.
It really is. Because she lacks the self-awareness.
Doesn't get it.
To see why she's so alienating.
Yeah.
Other people.
Totally.
Her arrogance.
Okay, so, but if she needs validation, does that contradict the whole lack of empathy thing?
Well, Hello Future Me does say that Azula does have a capacity
Okay.
for empathy.
Okay.
Albeit it's limited
Okay.
and conditional.
Yeah.
And they point to
That scene at the beach house.
Yeah.
With Zuko.
the beach house.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's like one of the few times we see her initiate,
Reach out to him.
yes, contact with Zuko.
Yeah.
And she seems genuinely
Concerned.
about his well-being.
Yeah, but I always read that scene as more manipulative than empathetic.
Right.
Like she's just trying to get something from him.
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
But like, remember the beach house
Oh, yeah?
is a place of like
Trauma.
trauma for both of them. And
Yeah.
she's inviting him to share a space of vulnerability with her.
Yeah.
Which is something she doesn't do
Right.
with anyone.
But then right after that,
Yes.
when Zuko calls Tylee a circus freak,
Yes.
she's the only one that laughs.
I know.
And it's so cruel.
It highlights that internal conflict
Yeah.
within her.
She's capable of empathy, but
It's always overshadowed
yeah.
by her need
Just power.
for control
Yeah.
to dominate.
Yeah.
She's so insecure and afraid. And that just makes her lash out.
Right. And assert her superiority.
Yeah.
Even when it hurts the people that are closest to her.
And then she says, my own mother thought I was a monster.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like, whoa,
Okay.
like that is some heavy stuff.
That line is so important
Yeah.
because it reveals that insecurity underneath her facade.
Yeah.
Like she is capable of introspection to a degree,
Right.
which you wouldn't expect
Yeah.
from someone.
Who's a complete sociopath.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
So she's aware of how people perceive her,
right.
even if she doesn't understand why.
Yes.
Okay, so we keep seeing this thing where she's like checking certain boxes,
Right.
but not all of them
Right.
for these different disorders.
And it really speaks to how like her upbringing
Yeah.
just shaped her into this like really complex,
Yeah.
contradictory person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we have to talk about her parents,
Right.
particularly the stark contrast.
Between Ursa and Ozai, between Ursa, who's like all about nurturing and love,
Yeah.
and Ozai, who's all about like crushing weakness.
Power and fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's no wonder she's so messed up.
Yeah, and you see that play out in that scene where Azula and Zuko are demonstrating their firebending
Yes.
to Fire Lord Azulon.
Yeah.
And Ursa is like praising Zuko just for trying his best.
Right.
And Ozai's like, no, you only get my approval
Yeah.
if you are powerful.
Right.
Like,
You're the best.
yeah, and so it's like Azula learns very early on
Yes.
that her worth is tied to her power and her ability to please her father.
Yeah.
So it sets her on this path of like ruthless ambition
Absolutely.
and needing to constantly prove herself.
Right.
Which I think ultimately leads to her downfall.
Yeah.
And the Hello Future Me video sort of breaks down this descent into madness.
Yes.
And it starts
With Mai.
with Mai's betrayal.
Yes.
That is the turning point.
When Mai says, I love Zuko more than I fear you,
Yeah.
it just like blows her mind.
It breaks her brain.
It does, but
'Cause-
her whole worldview
Yeah, it's built on this foundation.
of power and fear.
Power and fear
Yeah.
are the only ways to control people.
Right. And
Like-
suddenly,
like-
oh, there's this other
Maybe that's not the case.
called love.
Right.
And she's like, what?
Like, what is that?
Yeah,
I don't
understand this.
even know what that word means.
Right.
And so that's when the interpretive delusions start, right?
Yes.
Like suddenly she's seeing
Treachery everywhere. Enemies everywhere.
the daylight are 5 minutes late.
Yeah.
They must be conspiring against me.
Yeah.
Like her mind is just desperate.
Jumping at straws.
Yes, searching for an explanation
Yeah.
for why her world is falling apart.
And I think it's important to remember, too,
Yes.
that she's under immense pressure
Oh, yeah.
from her father.
Like the weight of his expectations
It's a lot.
is crushing
Yeah.
for a 14-year-old.
And then the hallucinations start. Yes, the hallucinations of her mother,
Yeah.
Ursa.
Criticizing her.
Yes.
Like all of her worst fears about herself
Right.
are being like projected back at her.
It's really sad.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So this is where it starts to get really tricky.
Yeah.
Because we're like, okay, so she's clearly having some sort of mental break. Is this schizophrenia?
Right.
What are we looking at here?
Hello Future Me brings up the DSM-V criteria for schizophrenia. And like while she's exhibiting like many of the key symptoms, like the hallucinations, the delusions, the breakdown in social functioning, there's the question of duration.
Right.
Like schizophrenia requires...
Okay, so it has to last for a certain amount of time.
Yes, a persistence of these symptoms.
Okay, so is it possible she's just having a temporary psychotic break?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Like even someone who is like...
A fully functioning person can just snap.
Yes, under immense pressure.
Okay.
But then there's another possibility that Hello Future Me brings up, which is schizoaffective disorder.
Okay.
And that's basically when you have a break from reality.
Yeah.
But you're also experiencing these like extreme mood swings.
Okay. It's complicated.
It's complicated. And I think that's the point.
Yeah, we're not trying to like diagnose her with anything.
We're not playing armchair psychologists.
Right, exactly. We're just trying to
understand
like the range of possibilities and how
it all fits together.
Her experiences align with different clinical presentations.
Totally. And I think what's really interesting is that these videos really highlight the role that her parents played.
Oh, absolutely.
In all of this.
Like the family dynamics are just wild.
Like Ursa is this force of love and compassion.
Right. She's the antithesis of Ozai.
Right. And Ozai is this like...
power and control.
Yeah. And so Azula's caught in the middle of that.
Yeah.
Imagine growing up in that environment.
You'd mess anybody up.
Like you're constantly getting mixed messages about what it means to be strong and worthy of love.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. And we see the consequences of that.
Absolutely.
In her relationship.
Yes.
In her mental state.
Her friendship.
Yeah. And ultimately...
her downfall.
In her downfall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where we're going to pick up after the break.
Okay.
We're going to delve deeper into Ursa's influence.
Okay.
And explore Azula's journey in the comics.
I'm excited.
And try to make sense of her complex legacy.
Yeah. Before we get back to Ursa, I think it's worth pointing out how much Azula's story has resonated with fans.
Oh, yeah.
On a level that goes beyond typical villain tropes, like unnecessary redemption arcs, touches on this idea of her being like a tool in the narrative.
Okay, not tool in like a demeaning way, right?
No. Like her character serves very specific purposes.
Okay.
In the story. She pushes Zuko towards growth.
Right.
She embodies the dangers of Ozai's philosophy.
Yeah.
And her fate underscores the tragic consequences of choosing like isolation over connection.
Right.
So like because of all of this, there's this huge debate in the fandom.
Oh, yeah.
About whether she even deserves redemption.
Right.
Like that's a huge question.
It is. And I think that debate kind of reflects our own anxieties.
Oh, for sure.
About forgiveness and accountability.
Really?
And like, can people really change after doing terrible things?
Absolutely.
Like it's a big...
She holds a mirror to our own...
moral complexities.
Yeah, our own moral complexities. Like some fans see her actions as just like unforgivable.
Totally.
The pain that she inflicts on Zuko, on Mai, on even her own allies. It's like hard to look past that.
Especially for people who have experienced that kind of like manipulation or abuse.
Yeah, either personally or with loved ones.
Yeah.
It's understandable why they would see her story as like a cautionary tale.
Right.
Not a redemption arc.
Yeah.
But then there's the other side of the coin.
Okay.
Like fans who see her as a victim of circumstance. A child who never had a chance to develop healthy coping mechanisms.
Right.
They desperately want her to find healing, forgiveness. It's almost like they're projecting their own hopes for a better future
onto her.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think both sides have valid points.
Yeah.
Which is what makes...
It's not black and white.
It's so interesting.
No.
It's so gray.
It's very gray.
And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah. And I think that's what these videos do so well.
Yes.
Is they acknowledge... the debate and like...
They don't try to say like, oh, this is the right answer.
Right.
It's like, well...
It's open to interpretation. She's a very layered character.
Yeah. And I think what's also really interesting is how people's own experiences
for sure
with mental illness sort of color their interpretation of Azula.
Totally. Like someone who has seen firsthand the devastating effects of like a severe mental disorder might be less likely to sympathize with her.
Right. Especially at her worst.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When she's like...
It's like her actions are not just choices.
Right.
They are...
Symptoms
of something.
Of something dangerous that needs to be like managed,
not
excused.
Yeah.
But then you have people who view mental illness as a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a mix of biology and psychology and societal factors.
Totally.
And for them, Azula becomes like a case study
Mm-hmm.
in how trauma and neglect
Right.
can just warp a person's behavior.
Yeah, and it's like they see,
They see the wounded child,
yeah,
not just the monster.
it's that whole nature versus nurture debate,
Yes.
but on a much deeper level.
Absolutely. And I think to the show's credit, it handles these themes with surprising nuance.
Yeah.
For what's essentially a children's cartoon,
Right.
it doesn't shy away from her darkness,
Mm-hmm.
but it avoids like demonizing her.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that's led to all these really important
Yeah.
conversations about mental health representation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, critics have really praised Avatar
Yes.
for its willingness to kind of tackle these issues
Head on.
head on.
Yeah.
And
Not just with Azula, like you see it with other characters too.
Yeah.
But with Azula specifically, like by not simplifying her struggles,
Mm-hmm.
it encourages viewers to approach mental illness with empathy
Right.
and a desire to understand
Yeah.
like the whole person,
Not just the diagnosis.
not just the diagnosis, like
Yeah.
what makes this person tick?
Exactly.
Like what are the underlying factors that are
Yeah.
contributing to their behavior?
And I think it's also important to note that, like,
Yeah.
her story doesn't end with her defeat in the series finale.
No.
Like, the comics
Yeah.
really dive into what happens to her after that.
What happened to Azula? Like really?
Yeah, goes there.
It's messy.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a clean redemption arc by any means.
It's not a happily ever after.
No.
It's like she's still struggling.
Yeah, she's struggling with mental illness.
Yeah.
She's searching for identity and purpose.
Yeah.
Um,
And like her delusions
yeah, they evolve.
evolve.
Like she becomes fixated on finding Ursa,
yes.
convinced that her mother has been manipulating her.
From the shadows.
Yeah, like from the shadow.
Like Hello Future Me points out that this is a systematized delusion.
Okay, so break that down for me.
So basically, like, her whole world is filtered
Okay.
through this lens of like Ursa as the puppet master.
Okay.
So every setback, every perceived slight
Yeah.
becomes evidence
Okay.
of this grand conspiracy that Ursa has orchestrated.
Okay.
It consumes her thoughts.
It dictates her actions.
It becomes her reality.
It becomes her reality.
Oh.
So it's not just like specific instances of betrayal.
Right.
It's this all-encompassing narrative that
Yeah.
she clings to.
Yeah.
And that leads to that really raw confrontation in The Search when she demands that Ursa call her a monster.
Oh, yeah.
Like she's seeking validation.
For her deepest fear.
Yes, for her deepest fear.
Yeah.
And instead, Ursa apologizes
Right.
for not loving her enough.
It's like the opposite
It's the opposite
of what she's expecting.
of what she wants to hear.
Yeah.
And it completely disrupts her worldview.
Because she's met with love
Right.
and remorse.
Not the confirmation of her monstrousness that she craved.
And it's really sad because
it-
you see the damage
Yes.
that Ozai's upbringing
Inflicted on her.
inflicted on her.
Yeah.
And in The Search, we see her like
Yeah.
become suicidal.
Yes.
Like she throws herself off Appa
Move.
mid-flight.
He tries to kill Zuko repeatedly.
Yeah.
And Hello Future Me connects this to
Mm-hmm.
the lack of a rescue parent figure.
Okay, like how Zuko had Iroh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like he offered unconditional love and
Yeah.
support and helped him like break free
From Ozai's.
from Ozai's grasp.
Yeah, Azula never had that.
She never had that.
She was completely alone.
And so she's left to navigate her trauma
Yeah.
and her mental illness alone.
With only Ozai as a model.
Right.
Which is terrifying.
It's tragic.
Yeah.
And that isolation fuels her new delusion in Smoke and Shadow,
Right.
which is that her destiny is to mold Zuko.
Into a ruthless Fire Lord.
Yes, into a ruthless tyrant.
Like she's still fixated on the throne.
Right.
But now it's about controlling Zuko.
Yes. It's about recreating that dynamic
Yeah.
that she had with Ozai.
But with her in charge.
But with her in charge,
Yeah.
it's a warped form of seeking validation. Like
Okay.
she's trying to prove her worth by manipulating someone else
Into becoming.
into becoming her twisted vision of strength.
Yeah.
And she goes to some pretty terrifying lengths to achieve this.
Oh, yeah. Like she terrorizes the Fire Nation capital.
Yeah.
Orchestrates riots.
Impersonates vengeful spirits.
Yeah, it's like she's completely lost her grip on reality.
She's unhinged.
Yeah.
And that final Agni Kai with Zuko in Smoke and Shadow, it mirrors their first fight.
Right.
But there's this chilling reversal. Like
Yeah.
in their first fight,
She was calm.
She was calm,
collected
in total control.
Yeah.
This time she is driven by rage.
Yeah, she's unhinged.
Completely unhinged.
Yeah.
It's a visual representation
Of her decline.
of her mental decline.
Yeah.
And even in defeat,
Yeah.
she blames Zuko
For making her that way.
for making her this way.
Yeah, and it's like,
It's really sad.
is she capable of change?
Right.
Like, is a true redemption arc
Possible.
even possible for her?
Right. And unnecessary redemption arcs makes the case that sometimes the lasting consequences of a villain's actions
Mm-hmm.
can be more meaningful than forcing a redemption arc.
Okay.
Like, they argue that Azula's isolation and defeat
Yeah.
serve as a powerful contrast to Zuko's journey
Right.
of healing and growth.
So they're not saying she's irredeemable.
Right.
But they're saying that forcing a happy ending might undermine the gravity
Yeah.
of her choices.
Exactly. And they see her story as a cautionary tale
Mm-hmm.
about the dangers of unchecked power
Yeah.
and the corrosive effects of choosing isolation over connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important,
Right.
because it's not just about her individual choices.
About the cycle.
It's about the cycle of violence.
Of violence.
Manipulation that she was both a victim of
Right.
and a perpetrator of.
Yeah.
And that cycle continues even after the show ends,
Right.
which is really interesting to think about.
But even unnecessary redemption arcs
Yeah.
acknowledges that her story is still unfolding.
Right.
Like, she's young.
She's young.
There's always the possibility of change.
Of change.
Even if it doesn't look like
a traditional redemption arc.
a traditional redemption arc.
And that's what makes her story so potent.
Right.
It challenges us to confront
Yeah.
uncomfortable truths
About human nature.
about human nature,
Yeah.
the lasting impact of trauma,
Yeah.
and the potential for both darkness and light
Within each of us.
within each of us. Like,
Yeah.
we all have that capacity
Yeah.
for both good and evil.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
And I think we need a moment to let it all sink in.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll try to distill some key takeaways
Yes.
from this deep dive into Azula's psychology
Okay.
and what her story means for us as viewers
Mm.
and as human beings navigating this complex
Right.
and often challenging world.
I like that.
All right, so much to unpack here. We've gone deep on Azula's psychology, her relationships, the descent into madness,
Yeah.
even her complex journey in the comics.
The comics are a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways you want our listener to walk away with?
I think the biggest one is that Azula's story isn't just about a villain's downfall.
Okay.
It's like a reflection of the human condition.
Yeah,
It forces us to grapple with, like, the complexities of trauma
right.
and how, like, both our nature and our upbringing shape who we become.
Because it's so easy to look at her and be like, oh, she's a sociopath, she's a monster.
Right.
But it's like,
She's a product of a system.
she's a product of a system
Yeah.
that was messed up.
A messed up family system.
Yeah.
One that rewarded cruelty and punished vulnerability.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And we see the consequences of that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, she exhibits traits of ASPD, potentially schizoaffective disorder, paranoia, crippling delusions. But those are just labels,
They are.
right? They don't really
They don't fully capture the nuance.
capture the nuance of her character.
Yeah.
Because she does show moments of empathy.
She does.
They might be fleeting.
Yeah.
They might be twisted,
Right.
but they're there.
Like her connection with Zuko, however unhealthy it is,
Yeah.
it's undeniable.
And that scene with Ursa in The Search where she just breaks down.
Yeah.
It's like you see the pain.
The rawness
Yeah.
behind that, like, carefully constructed persona.
It's a good reminder that even those who've seen evil experience a full range of human emotions,
Right.
and that those emotions are often rooted
Yes.
in unmet needs and past trauma.
Trauma.
Yeah, we can't just dismiss characters like Azula as purely malicious.
No.
Their story's more complicated than that.
Much more complicated.
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to kind of take away from this that equating power with worth is super dangerous,
Oh, yeah.
because that's what she was raised to believe.
That's all she knew. Yeah.
That her value came from her ability
To control and dominate others.
Yes.
And when that crumbled, she had nothing left.
Right, she was left with fear.
Yeah.
And like a shattered sense of self.
It's a lesson that resonates so much in today's world,
Absolutely.
where it's like everything's about,
Hustle culture.
yeah, hustle culture and, like, being the best and
Right.
crushing your enemies.
Winning at all costs.
Yeah, it's like Azula's downfall is a reminder that the pursuit of power for its own sake
Is empty.
is empty.
Yeah.
So where do we find meaning then?
That's the question that Zuko's journey answers.
Okay.
Like, true strength lies in the courage to be vulnerable,
Okay.
to connect with others,
Yeah.
and to contribute to something larger than yourself.
So it's not about power.
Right.
It's about
It's about building trust,
connection.
inspiring hope.
Yeah.
Not through fear and domination,
But through
through empathy
empathy and compassion.
and compassion.
I think this has been a really fascinating deep dive into Azula.
It has been.
I feel like we've learned so much.
Me too.
But I think more importantly, it's challenged us to kind of examine our own beliefs
Right.
about power and control.
Yeah.
And even what it means to be good or evil.
Absolutely. Like, those lines are blurry.
Yeah.
And I think Azula's story really highlights that.
And it also encourages us to approach difficult topics like mental illness
Nice.
with
Like-
empathy and understanding.
And a desire to learn more.
Yeah.
Right?
Rather than judgment and fear.
Absolutely.
And I think ultimately what Azula's story shows us is that even in the darkest of stories,
Yeah.
there's always a glimmer of hope.
There is.
There's always a possibility for growth and change,
Hmm.
and maybe even redemption.
Maybe.
We don't know what the future holds for Azula,
We don't.
but her story's far from over.
It's not over.
Yeah, and it continues to spark all these really important conversations about
Right.
mental health, about trauma,
Yeah.
about the power of empathy and connection.
I love that.
So we leave our listener with this.
Yes.
What do you think?
Is there hope for Azula?
Is Azula a lost cause, or is there still hope for her?
What does her story teach us?
Yeah, and what does her story teach us about the cycles of violence and abuse,
Right.
and the possibility of breaking free?
That's the question.
All right, today we're diving into something that's always kind of bugged me about Avatar.
Yo, Uncle.
Iroh, and specifically like how he's so connected to the spirit world.
Ah, yeah. Iroh's definitely got this whole other layer to him, doesn't he? Beyond just, being a fire-bending master.
Exactly. And we've got a bunch of YouTube theories lined up about how he got there. So our mission today, figure out how Iroh got so spiritually in tune. What do you say?
Sounds like a plan. I'm in.
Awesome. So first off, it's not like Iroh's just passively aware of spirits, right?
Right. He straight up chooses to enter the spirit world.
Yeah.
Even leaves his body behind. Remember in Korra when he tells her, like, I chose to leave my body and come here?
Yeah. And Zuko's totally shocked to find his uncle chilling in the spirit world. Like, that's not normal, even for benders.
It's definitely unique. And we see hints of it way back in the original series, like during the Siege of the North.
Oh, when he can see Fang, the dragon spirit?
Exactly. Aang's totally oblivious, but Iroh's interacting with this spirit.
Like he's got this extra sense. Which brings us to one theory, the Yu parallel. Remember how she became the moon spirit?
Right. Touched by it as a baby, then sacrificed herself to become the new moon spirit.
And what's interesting is Iroh's the only one who senses the moon spirit inside you. He even tells her, you've been touched by the moon spirit. Some of its life is in you.
You're right. That's pretty insightful. So could Iroh, like you, have a piece of a spirit inside him, giving him that connection?
That's what some of these theories are suggesting. And one gets even more specific.
Oh, do tell.
Okay, so picture this. Wan Shi Tong's library. Giant owl spirit obsessed with knowledge, right?
Right, that creepy library in the desert,
Yeah.
guarded by those fox spirits, the knowledge seekers.
And here's the thing. After Iroh's journey to the spirit world, one of the knowledge seekers goes missing.
Interesting. You think there's a connection?
Well, it's a pretty big coincidence. Maybe Iroh encountered a knowledge seeker, got some kind of, I don't know, spiritual download.
And that's what started his transformation, from war general to peaceful, tea-loving mentor.
Boom, that's the theory. After his travels, he goes from all about power to embracing wisdom and compassion.
It's a pretty remarkable shift.
Yeah.
And it's not just internal, right? It affects how he treats Zuko. He tries to steer him away from that same destructive path.
Like he learned a whole new definition of strength.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into Zuko, let's stick with this knowledge seeker idea.
Yeah. What kind of knowledge could a spirit like that even give?
Ooh, now that's a question for the ages. And that's what we'll tackle next time. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. Last time, things got pretty interesting. Knowledge seeker, maybe giving Iroh some spiritual wisdom?
Yeah, that's a wild idea. But if it's true, how does that explain his whole, change of heart? From war guy to peace-loving dude?
Well, one of the videos said knowledge seekers are all about, the interconnectedness of everything. They want to know how it all fits, not control it.
So it's less about conquering knowledge and more about understanding it.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
if Iroh had this connection to a knowledge seeker, maybe that's what shifted his whole view, seeing the world beyond just the physical stuff.
Instead of outward power, he sees strength in compassion, patience, all that.
Right. And it's not just talk. It's in his actions, even his fighting. Remember how he redirects energy using his opponent's force? Not brute force, but balance, harmony.
It's like his fighting style is a reflection of his whole philosophy. But some people might say, Iroh's change wasn't just knowledge, it was losing his son, Lu Ten.
Oh, for sure. Personal experiences, they shape us. Lu Ten's death was huge for Iroh. But maybe this knowledge, maybe from the knowledge seeker, it helped him with that grief.
Instead of falling apart, he turns his pain into helping others.
And that's where Zuko comes in, right? Iroh sees him going down a similar path, all anger and resentment. He wants to help him break free.
It's interesting how Iroh pushes Zuko to learn from other cultures, see things differently. He even says, it's important to draw wisdom from many different places. If you take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale.
Oh, that's so true. Open-mindedness, seeking knowledge from everywhere, just like the knowledge seekers do.
It all fits together, doesn't it? The knowledge seeker, Iroh changing, helping Zuko. It's all about finding strength through understanding and balance.
I think you're onto something. But we also have this other theory about Iroh's tea. Like maybe his tea rituals were a type of spiritual practice.
Wait, really? I always thought that was just like a quirky Iroh thing.
Think about it. Tea ceremonies. They're all about ritual, mindfulness, appreciating the little things that Iroh totally embodies and tries to teach Zuko.
He is always telling Zuko to be patient, be present, find peace.
Right. And those qualities, they're often connected to like spiritual growth, reaching deeper states of consciousness.
So are you saying drinking tea helped Iroh get to the spirit world? That's a stretch, isn't it?
Maybe not directly, but maybe it helped him cultivate the peace, the clarity he needed. Like tea was a tool for self-discovery.
It makes you think about our own routines. Maybe they have more spiritual potential than we realize.
I think so. And that's what's cool about Iroh. He shows us how to find deeper meaning in everyday stuff. Find peace even when things are crazy.
It's like spirituality doesn't have to be this big mystical thing. It can be in a cup of tea, taking a moment to just be.
Absolutely. And in sharing that tea, remember, Iroh's always offering tea to everyone. Zuko, Toph, anyone. It's his way of showing kindness, sharing wisdom.
Yeah, it's like his love language, extending a hand, a cup of peace.
Exactly. And that's another part of his journey. It's not just about him being enlightened. It's about helping others find their way too.
He's the ultimate mentor, guiding without forcing, offering support, wisdom, but letting people choose their path. But what about his final choice, going into the spirit world permanently?
Yes, that's something we should definitely unpack.
Yeah.
The mystery of Iroh's ultimate journey awaits us.
So we've talked about Iroh's connection to the spirit world, his big change, and how he guides others. But we got to talk about his final decision, to stay in the spirit world for good. It's beautiful, but also kind of confusing.
Yeah, it is. And it's not like a normal death, right? He chooses to leave his body, makes that call.
Makes you wonder what led him there. Was it destiny? Or something more personal,
Some fans think it might go back to that spirit inside him. Like, remember you? She had a piece of the moon spirit, then she became one with it.
So Iroh's departure was kind of like reuniting with his source.
Maybe. If he did get a part of a spirit from the knowledge seeker or wherever, it kind of makes sense he'd go back to that spiritual plane.
It's like he had a piece of the spirit world inside him all along. And then when it was time, he went home.
Exactly. A really deep connection to the spirit world. Not just a place he visited, but maybe where he was always meant to be.
Makes you think about what home really means, huh? But even without the spirit stuff, his choice to leave says a lot about how he saw life and death.
He wasn't scared of dying. It was just part of the journey for him.
Yeah, like a natural thing. And that's a powerful way to see it.
Iroh teaches us that death isn't the end. It's just changing into something else.
Takes away some of the fear of the unknown. Death is a transformation, not a full stop.
And there might be even more to it. Remember, Iroh's still around in Korra, in the spirit world. His mind's still there, even though his body's gone.
It's kind of comforting, isn't it? Like there's more to the afterlife than we think.
It reminds us there's something bigger connecting us all. Even after we die, we're not really alone.
He seems so at peace in the spirit world. It's kind of reassuring,
Yeah, I get that. I think you've hit on something important. Iroh's whole journey, his final choice, it's all about finding peace with ourselves, with life and death, everything.
He shows us how to face the unknown, be strong even when we're vulnerable, be kind, to live knowing that our spirits, they keep going.
He was a really special character. He defied what people expected, made us rethink strength, spirituality, even death.
Think about what stuck with you from Iroh's story. What wisdom can you take with you? Maybe it's to be open to knowledge, to forgive, to be compassionate. Or maybe it's just to have a cup of tea and enjoy this moment. Whatever it is, let's all keep learning from Iroh. we're tackling Zuko, one of the most fascinating characters in animation history from Avatar, The Last Airbender.
Oh, Zuko, a character who really embodies the idea that growth is not always a straight line. Right?
Exactly. We've got 3 YouTube videos as our guide today. One's dedicated to just Zuko's psychology. Another analyzes the world building specifically in the episodes Zuko Alone. And then one that kind of goes through and explores Zuko's character development over the whole series.
Really captivating character development.
Yeah. So the psychology video really digs into the impact of Zuko's upbringing and especially the relationship with his father, Fire Lord Ozai.
Yeah.
It argues that a lot of Zuko's early actions are fueled by a deep shame stemming from Ozai's abuse.
And it's not just your average father-son conflict.
No.
This video points to specific moments that highlight the severity of Ozai's actions.
Right.
I mean, think about when Zuko's just 13 years old and Ozai challenges him to an Agni Kai.
Right.
And not only that, but he burns Zuko's face and leaves this permanent physical reminder of that trauma.
It's hard to even fathom the psychological impact of that. To be betrayed and physically scarred by your own parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And the video argues that that event wasn't an isolated incident.
Right.
This was a pattern of abuse that started really from Zuko's infancy.
Oh, wow.
Ozai almost threw Zuko over the palace walls as a baby simply because he doubted Zuko's firebending abilities.
Wow. That puts it into perspective.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of that need for approval,
Right.
The video labels Zuko's outward anger as humiliated fury. Essentially, he uses rage as a defense mechanism to avoid confronting that deep-seated shame that he's carrying.
Humiliated fury. Yeah, that's a powerful concept.
It is.
It highlights how shame can really warp a person's entire worldview, especially when it's ingrained from childhood.
Right.
You know, instead of acknowledging their own pain and vulnerability, they lash out and they project that inner turmoil onto others.
They're trying to create this wall of anger to keep those emotions at bay.
Exactly. And it becomes a vicious cycle.
Right.
The more Zuko acts out, the more he reinforces these negative beliefs that Ozai has planted in his mind.
Right.
It's like he's trapped in a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So how does this humiliated fury actually play out in Zuko's life? We see it in his interactions with the Avatar and his crew, but are there any moments that stand out as like key examples of that?
Oh, yeah. One of the most telling examples is Zuko's reaction when he encounters Zhao, another firebending master, early on in the series.
Right.
Zuko is so consumed by the need to prove himself and to regain his honor that he acts recklessly. He challenges Zhao to a duel even though he knows he's at a disadvantage.
He's willing to risk it all.
Yeah, it's like he's so desperate for that validation that he's willing to risk everything, even his own life, to get it.
So that makes me think about how his obsession with capturing the Avatar kind of ties into this whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's not just about restoring his honor in his father's eyes. It's about proving his worth to himself, to the world. Capturing the Avatar is like his twisted path to achieving that sense of significance that he wants so bad.
And the tragedy is that by chasing this external validation, Zuko misses out on the genuine connections and opportunities for growth that are right in front of him.
Right.
Like, think about his interactions with Iroh, his uncle.
Iroh is such a great character.
Yeah. Such a wise and patient man.
Yeah.
And he consistently tries to steer Zuko toward a different path, one that's based on compassion and self-acceptance. But Zuko is so blinded by his shame and his anger, he just can't see it.
He can't see the forest through the trees.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. The video brings all of this back to real-world psychology.
Oh, yeah.
It points out that the cycle of abuse, the shame, the anger,
Right.
this isn't just a fictional concept. It's a real pattern that plays out in families and relationships all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Understanding those patterns can be the first step towards breaking free from them.
Now, the psychology video doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of Zuko's experiences, specifically his struggles with trauma.
And it argues that Zuko exhibits several symptoms of PTSD, like nightmares, flashbacks, and emotional distress, especially when he's reminded of his scar.
Oh, makes sense.
What's really interesting is that the video distinguishes between PTSD and something called CPTSD, or complex PTSD.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets a little technical, but essentially CPTSD often develops in response to repeated or prolonged trauma.
Okay.
So kind of like what Zuko experienced growing up with Ozai.
Right. So for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term, complex PTSD, could you maybe give us a brief explanation?
Yeah, how does it actually differ from PTSD?
So think of it this way. PTSD is like a single intense shock to your system, like being in a car accident.
Okay.
CPTSD, on the other hand, is more like being exposed to this constant low-level current of electricity.
Interesting.
It's the cumulative effect of ongoing trauma. like living in a war zone or enduring years of abuse. And this ongoing trauma can have a really profound impact on a person's sense of self, their relationships, their ability to regulate their emotions. That's so insightful. So if we apply that to Zuko, his experiences with Ozai, the Agni Kai, being banished, this constant pressure to capture the Avatar,
Right.
it all contributes to this complex trauma that he's carrying with him.
Absolutely. And you see it manifest in so many ways throughout the series. You remember the scene at the beach house in season 3?
Oh, yeah.
He's forced to confront his past when Azula manipulates him,
Oh, gosh, yeah.
playing on his deepest insecurities, and he completely breaks down.
Yeah.
He's unable to cope with the overwhelming emotions that are resurfacing.
Yeah, that scene always gets me. You can just feel Zuko's pain, his vulnerability, his inability to escape the shadow of his past.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that healing from trauma is a process. It's not a destination. There will be setbacks, there will be moments of intense pain,
Right.
and there will be times when it feels like the past will never let go.
Absolutely. Now, there's another moment where Zuko tries to be struck by lightning during the day of Black Sun invasion. And that really highlights the self-destructive behavior that can come from unaddressed trauma. The video argues that this was Zuko's attempt to kind of regain control, to almost master the force that scarred him in the first place.
Yeah, you can really see the parallels to his relationship with Ozai.
Right.
He's trying to conquer the source of his pain, to rewrite the narrative of his own suffering.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to see him grappling with these emotions and resorting to these extreme measures to try and cope.
Yeah.
It's like he's so used to associating love and acceptance with pain that he doesn't know how to experience genuine happiness.
That brings us to one of the most crucial elements of Zuko's character arc, his journey towards healing and recovery.
Right.
And while it is a long and winding road,
Yeah.
the video points out that Zuko does start taking those first steps towards wholeness.
And it's not just about overcoming the trauma,
Yeah.
it's about him finding his own identity, his own purpose, outside of the expectations and limitations that have been put on him.
Which is what makes his story so compelling, right?
Absolutely.
He goes from this angry, lost soul to this compassionate and self-aware leader. And that transformation, that journey of self-discovery is something that resonates with all of us.
Absolutely. What's really fascinating is the video actually outlines the 5 core elements of trauma recovery. And we see Zuko embodying each of these elements throughout his journey.
Let's dive into those.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first is safe attachment. And Zuko initially finds this with his uncle Iroh,
Right.
who provides a sense of unconditional love and acceptance that Zuko has never experienced before.
It's like Iroh is that wise mentor figure that so many of us crave in our own lives.
Yes.
He sees Zuko's potential even when Zuko can't see it himself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he creates this space for Zuko to be vulnerable, to express his emotions without judgment. And that sense of safety and support is essential for anyone healing from trauma.
It's like that feeling of finally being seen and understood for who you truly are, flaws and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And the second element builds on that foundation of safe attachment, and that's self-esteem and self-cohesion.
Okay.
So Iroh consistently encourages Zuko to recognize his own worth, to challenge those negative beliefs that Ozai has instilled in him.
Right. It's not just about telling Zuko he's worthy.
Right.
It's about helping him discover it for himself.
Exactly.
And we see these moments of growth where Zuko starts to make decisions based on his own values, not just blindly following orders or seeking his father's approval.
Like when he refuses to fight Aang in the Southern Raiders episode.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a huge turning point for Zuko. He's finally choosing compassion over revenge, forgiveness over resentment.
Okay, so we've got safe attachment, we've got self-esteem. What are the other 3 elements here?
So the third is meaning making, the process of reframing our understanding of the past, of making sense of the trauma we've experienced. For Zuko, this involves recognizing that his father's actions were wrong, that he didn't deserve the abuse he endured.
And that's a huge shift for him, right? He spent years blaming himself, believing that he was somehow responsible for his father's cruelty.
Right. And as he starts to let go of that self-blame, he begins to see his own story in a new light. He recognizes that he has the power to choose a different path, to define his own destiny.
So powerful. So what about symptom mastery and effect tolerance?
So symptom mastery is all about learning to manage those physical and emotional symptoms of trauma. We see this as Zuko starts to control his anger, his impulsivity, his tendency to kind of react defensively.
It's not that those traits disappear completely, but he learns to channel them in a constructive way.
Right. His passion, his intensity become assets, not liabilities.
I like that.
And then effect tolerance is the ability to experience those difficult emotions without being totally overwhelmed by them.
Yeah.
It's about learning to sit with discomfort, to process those feelings, and to move through them without resorting to unhealthy coping mechanisms.
That's such a valuable skill, not just for people who have experienced trauma, but for everyone.
Absolutely.
It's about developing emotional resilience, and we see Zuko slowly developing this ability throughout the series.
Yeah.
He becomes more capable of handling criticism, setbacks, even moments of joy, without shutting down or lashing out.
And what's really remarkable is that Zuko's journey of recovery isn't just a personal one.
Right.
It's intertwined with his growth as a leader, with his evolving understanding of the world around him.
And that brings us to the episode Zuko Alone, which we're going to dive into in part 2. This is getting good. But for now, I want to leave you with this thought. Have you ever felt that pull between wanting someone's approval, even when you know deep down it might be toxic for you? Zuko's story reminds us that true validation comes from within, from recognizing our own worth, embracing our own unique journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be back in just a minute with part 2.
So true, so true.
Okay. Now I'm really excited to dive into Zuko Alone, the world-building video called this episode a masterclass in visual storytelling.
It is.
And I totally agree. It's amazing how, the environment reveals so much about the impact of the 100-Year War.
Right.
Especially in the Earth Kingdom.
Yeah, the episode really flips the script on how we perceive the war, right? We're so used to seeing it from the perspective of Team Avatar.
Right.
Fighting for balance, fighting for peace.
Right.
But Zuko Alone forces us to confront the consequences of the Fire Nation's aggression from the perspective of ordinary people.
Like those villagers that Zuko encounters.
Right.
Many of their homes are made of wood, which is such a stark contrast to what we're used to seeing in the Earth Kingdom.
Totally. And the video points out that this detail is significant.
Okay.
It suggests a lack of earthbenders in the village, likely due to conscription into the Earth Kingdom army.
Wow.
So the Fire Nation's war machine is literally stripping these communities of their skilled laborers, leaving them struggling to rebuild and defend themselves.
So you realize that the war isn't just this abstract conflict happening in the background. It's having a real tangible impact on people's lives, their livelihoods, their very sense of security.
And it's not just about physical destruction either.
Right.
The war has created this climate of fear and suspicion. Remember how the villagers initially treat Zuko with hostility?
Oh, yeah.
They see his scar, they see his Fire Nation heritage, and they immediately assume that he's a threat.
Right. Just based on how he looks.
Exactly. It's a reminder of how conflict can breed prejudice and division,
right,
even within communities that were once united.
Yeah. And then you got this character, Gao,
who
is the antagonist of the episode.
He's so fascinating.
He is.
Because he represents those complex power dynamics within the Earth Kingdom itself.
Right.
Here's this bully, the only earthbender in town, exploiting his power to intimidate and control everyone else.
He's like a microcosm of the Fire Nation, but on a smaller scale.
Exactly. It's a reminder that oppression can exist within any society, regardless of who's waging war on whom.
Now, it's interesting how Zuko, who has been a victim of abuse himself, initially kind of aligns himself with Gao.
Yeah, he sees a kindred spirit and this powerful figure, someone who takes what he wants without apology.
But as the episode progresses, he starts to see through Gao's facade. He witnesses Gao's cruelty firsthand.
Right.
How he exploits the villagers' fear for his own personal gain.
Yeah, it's a pivotal moment for Zuko.
It is.
Because he begins to question his own beliefs about power and authority.
Right.
He realizes that true strength isn't about domination or control. It's about protecting those who are vulnerable.
Which perfectly sets the stage for Zuko's de-radicalization.
Oh, absolutely.
As discussed in the psychology video. It argues that Zuko's initial belief in the Fire Nation's propaganda is a form of radicalization.
Yeah.
He's been indoctrinated with this idea of Fire Nation's superiority, their destiny to rule the world.
Yeah. And that ideology becomes his crutch, his way of making sense of his own pain, of justifying his actions.
Right. But his experiences in the Earth Kingdom, especially in Zuko Alone, start to chip away at that.
Yeah.
He's exposed to the suffering caused by the war, the resilience of the people that he encounters, the hypocrisy of those in power.
He's seeing the world through a new lens, one that's less black and white, more nuanced, more complex.
It's not just about those external experiences, though.
Right.
The video highlights how Iroh's influence plays a crucial role in Zuko's de-radicalization.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, Iroh has already gone through his own disillusionment with the Fire Nation.
Yeah.
Remember how he lost his son, Lu Ten, in the siege of Ba Sing Se? that event shattered Iroh's belief in the Fire Nation's righteousness.
Completely. And from that point on, he becomes this voice of dissent.
Right.
This counter-narrative to the Fire Nation propaganda.
Yeah.
He subtly challenges Zuko's assumptions, encourages him to question the stories that he's been told.
He's planting seeds of doubt.
Yeah, exactly. Seeds that will eventually blossom into this more compassionate and understanding worldview.
And one of the most powerful examples of Iroh's influence is his emphasis on finding honor in serving others.
Yes.
Not in pursuing personal glory.
Which ties back to that concept of the significance quest that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Zuko is so desperate for a sense of purpose, a way to feel like his life has meaning.
Right.
But initially he believes that significance can only be found by achieving his father's approval.
Right.
Through restoring his honor as a prince of the Fire Nation.
But Iroh shows him that different path.
Yeah.
You know, where true significance lies in using his power to help others, to protect the vulnerable, to fight for what's right, even if it means defying his own nation.
And it's so fascinating how the world-building video actually connects this idea of this significance quest to real-world phenomena.
Okay.
It argues that radical ideologies, especially nationalistic ones, they prey on this human need to feel like we belong, like our lives have a larger purpose.
Right. They offer this prepackaged identity,
Yeah.
a set of beliefs and values that promise belonging and significance.
Exactly. And when people feel lost or disenfranchised or lacking in individual agency,
Yeah.
they're more likely to cling to these ideologies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they become vulnerable to manipulation,
Absolutely.
especially when those ideologies promise power or glory.
And it's not just about joining extremist groups or anything like that. This dynamic can play out in more subtle ways, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, think about how people get caught up in online echo chambers where they're constantly being bombarded with information that just confirms their existing biases.
Right. And it creates this false sense of community and validation.
Right.
Makes it really difficult to challenge those beliefs.
So it's so important to cultivate critical thinking skills.
Yes.
To be able to step back and examine the narratives that we're being told. To ask ourselves who benefits from these stories. What are the underlying assumptions here? Are there alternative perspectives that I'm not considering?
Those are such important questions.
It's about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to be discerning consumers of information,
Yes.
to question the status quo, to seek out diverse viewpoints.
And it's not always easy.
No, it's not.
It can be really uncomfortable to challenge our own beliefs, to confront our own biases. But that's where real growth happens.
Now, speaking of growth, let's talk about how Zuko's firebending becomes a metaphor for his internal struggles.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Remember how he loses his bending for a while after joining Team Avatar?
Yeah,
Such a brilliant storytelling choice.
it is.
It's like his firebending, which was once this symbol of power and aggression, becomes blocked, reflecting his inner turmoil.
Yeah, the character development video argues that Zuko's initial approach to firebending was all about force and control. You know, he was trying to bend the flames to his will, just like he was trying to control his own emotions.
Right.
Control his own destiny.
And it backfires.
Yeah, big time. The harder he tried to force it, the more he lost his connection to that true essence of firebending.
Like he was trying to fight fire with fire.
Exactly, which we all know doesn't work.
So it's only when he learns to let go of that need for control,
Right.
to embrace a more balanced, more harmonious approach, that his firebending returns.
And it's not just about the technique either.
Right.
The video highlights how Zuko's firebending style actually evolves to reflect his emotional growth.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Remember how his fighting used to be all sharp, aggressive movements? Like he was constantly on the attack?
Yeah.
But as he heals and matures,
Right.
his movements become more fluid, more controlled.
Okay.
He's no longer just lashing out. He's channeling his energy with precision and purpose.
It's like his firebending becomes an extension of his inner peace.
Yes.
His newfound clarity and compassion.
And it's this beautiful visual representation of the transformative power of letting go of that anger and resentment.
Right.
When Zuko finally embraces forgiveness and compassion, his firebending becomes this source of healing for himself and for others.
This makes me think of that one scene
Yeah.
when Zuko and Aang are training together and they visit that ancient civilization, the Sun Warriors.
Sun Warriors, yeah.
And it's there that Zuko learns the true meaning of firebending.
Right.
Not as a tool of destruction, but as an expression of life and energy.
That's such a pivotal moment in Zuko's journey.
It is.
He learns that fire isn't inherently good or evil. It's all about how you choose to wield it.
And it's interesting how Zuko's understanding of firebending kind of mirrors his evolving relationship with Aang.
Oh, yeah.
They start out as sworn enemies,
Right.
but they gradually develop this bond of respect and understanding.
Yeah, their firebending lessons become this metaphor for their growing friendship.
Right. And it's such a compelling dynamic because it's a reminder that even the most unlikely of friendship can blossom when we're willing to let go of those preconceived notions and see each other's humanity.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we all have this capacity for both darkness and light.
Right.
And that sometimes the people who challenge us the most can also become our greatest teachers.
It's not just about learning from each other, though.
Right.
Zuko and Aang's relationship also highlights the power of forgiveness. Like Aang, despite all the pain that Zuko's caused him,
Right.
chooses to believe in Zuko's capacity for change.
Yeah.
He sees the good in him even when Zuko himself can't see it.
And that unwavering faith, that unconditional acceptance, it plays a huge role in Zuko's eventual redemption.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful example of how even the deepest wounds can heal when we choose to offer compassion and understanding instead of judgment and resentment.
So true.
All of this leads to that pivotal moment in Zuko's arc. His decision to betray his father and join Team Avatar.
Such a huge turning point, not just for Zuko, but for the fate of the world.
Huge. And it's not an easy decision.
Yeah.
He's literally choosing to sever ties with his family, his nation.
Everything he's ever known.
But it's a decision born out of deep conviction.
Yeah.
He's finally seen through the lies of the Fire Nation's propaganda.
Right.
And he recognizes that true honor lies in fighting for justice, even if it means defying those in power.
It's a powerful reminder that personal growth often involves making those difficult choices.
Yeah.
The ones that require us to sacrifice our comfort, our security, even our relationship.
But those sacrifices are often necessary for us to align ourselves with our true values, to become the people that we're meant to be.
Exactly. And in Zuko's case, that choice leads him to his true destiny.
Right.
His role as a leader who will help restore balance to the world.
Before we get to that ultimate act of defiance, where he confronts his father during the solar eclipse, I want to take a moment to appreciate Zuko alone. It is such a beautifully crafted episode, full of symbolism, full of nuance.
It's a masterclass in storytelling.
It is.
You know how it weaves together Zuko's personal journey with those larger themes of war, trauma, redemption. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that focus on those quiet moments of introspection.
Right.
The subtle shifts in perspective that lead to profound transformation.
All right, I think we're ready to tackle that climax of Zuko's arc.
Let's do it.
We're going to dive into that in part 3, but for now, I want to leave you with this thought. What narratives have you accepted as truth without questioning them?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Zuko's journey reminds us that it's never too late to deconstruct the stories we've been told.
Yeah.
And rewrite our own narratives based on our own values and our own experiences.
Absolutely.
We'll be back in just a minute with part 3.
Ooh, that's a great question to think about.
Okay, so we left off with Zuko making that huge decision to leave the Fire Nation and join Team Avatar.
Which leads him to one of the most powerful confrontations in the whole series, his encounter with his father during the solar eclipse.
Yeah, the moment he's been building toward for 3 seasons.
Right.
He finally gets that chance to face his abuser, to break free from that cycle of manipulation and control.
The character development video calls this like the climax of Zuko's arc.
It makes sense.
It's the moment that he fully embraces his true self.
Right.
And rejects that distorted identity that Ozai has forced on him.
And it's not just about defying his father, right?
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming his agency, his right to choose his own destiny.
Exactly. And the scene is so powerful because it's not just a physical showdown. It's a battle for Zuko's soul.
Yeah.
He's literally fighting to break free from the chains of his past.
And what I think is so interesting is that Zuko doesn't just lash out in anger.
Right.
He confronts Ozai with a clarity and a conviction that we haven't seen before.
Absolutely.
He really articulates the depth of Ozai's abuse.
Right.
And how it's warped his sense of self, his understanding of the world.
Like all those years of repressed pain, all that anger and resentment is finally pouring out of him.
Yeah.
But it's not a destructive outburst. It's controlled. It's purposeful.
Yeah, it's incredibly cathartic to witness.
It is.
You know, we've been on this journey with Zuko for so long.
Yeah.
Watching him struggle and then to see him confront those demons head on.
It's a testament to the power of self-awareness, you know?
Right.
He's done the work.
He has.
He's examined his past. He's challenged his beliefs. He's learned to regulate his emotions.
And now he can stand in his truth and speak it with power.
And what's so beautiful is that Zuko doesn't just reject his father.
Right.
he also forgives him.
It's powerful.
And not because Ozai deserves it,
Right.
but because Zuko needs to release that burden of resentment to truly move forward.
Yeah.
Forgiveness in this context, it's not about condoning Ozai's actions.
Right.
It's about recognizing that holding on to that anger and bitterness only hurts Zuko in the end.
Yeah, it's an act of self-care.
Exactly.
Recognizing that his well-being is no longer tied to his father's approval.
So he's breaking free from that toxic bond, reclaiming his own sense of self.
And that allows him to fully embrace his role as a hero.
Yes.
He joins Team Avatar not as a means to an end,
Right.
but as a genuine act of service. He wants to help restore balance to the world,
Right.
to atone for the harm that his nation has caused.
And it's not just about fighting the Fire Nation either.
Right.
Zuko becomes a mentor to Aang.
Yeah, he guides him.
Right, on his journey to master firebending.
It's like he's passing on the wisdom that he's gained,
Yeah.
helping Aang avoid the pitfalls that he fell into.
That mentorship role is so crucial for Zuko's growth.
It is.
It allows him to use his experiences, his pain, his struggles to actually help someone else.
It's beautiful, right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of how we can transform our wounds into sources of strength and healing.
And it's not just Aang.
Right.
Zuko forms a deep bond with Katara, offering her support as she works through her own trauma.
He doesn't try to fix her or tell her how to feel.
No.
He just holds space for her pain,
Yeah.
offers a listening ear, a compassionate presence.
Zuko's journey really highlights the power of empathy
Yeah.
and understanding.
He's learned to see the world through the eyes of others, to recognize that everyone is carrying their own burdens, their own hidden wounds.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the psychology of Zuko,
Right.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think Zuko's story reminds us that growth is a process.
Yeah.
It's messy, it's nonlinear, it's often painful,
Right.
but it's also incredibly rewarding.
It is.
Zuko shows us that even the most broken parts of ourselves can be healed. Even the most deeply ingrained patterns can be changed.
And it's never too late to start that journey.
Absolutely not. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit,
Absolutely.
our capacity for growth, change, and redemption.
It's a message of hope.
Yeah.
That we all have the potential to overcome adversity and become the heroes of our own stories.
And sometimes the greatest act of heroism is just choosing to show up for ourselves,
Yeah.
to do the work of healing, to offer compassion to ourselves and to others.
Beautifully said. So if you're feeling inspired by Zuko's journey, I encourage you to go back and revisit the series, maybe with a fresh perspective. Pay attention to the nuances of his character development, the way his experiences shape his choices and his interactions with everyone.
And ask yourself, what can I learn from Zuko's struggles?
Right.
How can his journey inspire me to embrace my own growth and transformation?
Maybe Zuko's story will spark a fire in you.
Yeah.
A fire that ignites your own journey toward healing and self-discovery, and ultimately a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
It's a powerful story.
It is.
All right, let's dive into this leadership thing. We're taking a look at Sokka.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, you sent over this YouTube video essay, How Sokka Became the Leader of Team Avatar.
That's the one, yeah, by Master Samwise.
It seems like the perfect way to think about what makes a good leader.
Totally.
Sokka's story, I think it's really interesting for figuring out how to be a better leader.
You might be surprised by what we can learn from a cartoon character.
Right.
Sokka's journey, well, it's not your typical hero story, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
He starts out with some pretty big flaws.
Yeah.
Remember at the very beginning of the series, how he doesn't trust anyone,
Oh, yeah.
especially Aang.
Totally.
And, well, let's just say his views on women warriors are a little outdated.
Ooh, yeah. Those early episodes, they're a little hard to watch now.
Yeah, they haven't aged very well.
But, the video essay makes the point of saying that these flaws are actually important for him to become a leader. It says that his distrust comes from seeing his world destroyed by the Fire Nation, which is pretty traumatic.
Yeah, and his views on women, they're from growing up in a really traditional society.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The Water Tribe is super patriarchal.
Exactly. So it's all about understanding where his behavior comes from.
Okay, so like looking at the context.
Exactly. He's only 16.
Wow, yeah, he's so young.
But he has to be responsible for so much because his dad's not there. Imagine that pressure, being the protector of your whole tribe at that age.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like his flaws aren't just random things about him. They come from his experiences.
For sure. And I think that's what makes his transformation so compelling.
Totally.
It's not about just getting rid of those flaws. It's about seeing them, facing them, and growing from them.
Yeah. That makes sense.
That's where real leadership starts.
I think that's a really powerful idea for all of us. We all have flaws and biases.
Absolutely.
That come from how we grew up and what we've been through. But we can choose to confront them and learn from them.
Absolutely. Instead of letting those flaws control us.
Right. We can become better.
Totally. And this is where the Kyoshi Island episode becomes so important for Sokka.
Oh, yeah. Suki.
Exactly.
She's so cool.
This is where he meets Suki. She's a super skilled Kyoshi warrior.
I love the Kyoshi warriors.
She challenges him not just as a fighter, but also his ideas about women warriors.
That's right. She beats him, like, really badly.
Haha, yeah.
Which makes him question his assumptions about women warriors. He even says, "I'm not sure that I am worthy, and I had a lot to learn." That moment is huge. It shows how powerful humility can be.
It really is.
He's willing to learn from someone he thought was less than him just because she's a woman.
And that openness to learning from anyone, that's a sign of a true leader.
Totally.
It's about knowing that you can learn from anyone, anywhere, and being willing to let go of your ego.
Have you ever been in a situation where you had to learn from someone you didn't expect?
Oh, definitely. It happens more often than you'd think. It can be a really humbling experience.
Yeah.
But those are the moments where you learn the most.
That's exactly what happens to Sokka. His encounter with Suki changes everything. He doesn't just learn some new fighting moves. He starts to question everything he thought he knew.
Exactly. He becomes more open-minded. It's a great example of how tough times and even failure can make you a better person.
Right. It's like they force you to grow.
Exactly. Now, this doesn't mean every leader has to have some big failure to learn and grow.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it does show how important it is to be open to feedback and to be willing to see things from a different perspective.
I totally agree. You know, it's easy to think that some people are just born leaders, but Sokka shows us that it's a process. You have to be willing to learn from your mistakes, ask for help, and always try to be better.
And that's a lesson anyone can use no matter what they want to do in life.
Totally. If Sokka goes on this journey, we see two things about his leadership: persistence and adaptability. Yeah, that's interesting.
He's super determined. When he sets his mind to something...
True, he's very tenacious. But it's not just about being stubborn. It's about being smart and creative. Remember all the cool things he invents.
Oh, for sure. The drill, slicing the airship in half.
Exactly.
He's a genius when it comes to solving problems.
That's why he's such a good leader. He's not just determined, he's resourceful. But is that enough?
Good question.
Can you overcome anything with just willpower and a positive attitude? What about when you need to change your approach, be more flexible?
That's a great question. And I think the day of Black Sun invasion shows us exactly how Sokka struggles with this.
Oh, I'm interested to hear this.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Let's get into it.
So the day of Black Sun invasion, this is where all of Sokka's planning and determination are really tested.
Big time.
He put everything into this mission, coordinating this huge invasion force to attack the Fire Nation when their bending is at its weakest.
Makes sense.
But things don't go as planned.
Nope, definitely not.
And this is where we see that just being persistent isn't enough.
Right.
Sokka's plan is great in theory.
Yeah.
But it's based on some assumptions that turn out to be wrong.
Like what?
Well, the Fire Lord isn't where they expected him to be.
Oh, right.
And the Fire Nation knew they were coming.
So they were ready.
Yeah, it's total chaos.
Oh, wow.
They're facing way more resistance than they thought. They can't communicate. And Aang can't find the Fire Lord.
That's a problem.
Sokka has to make a really important decision.
Does he stick with the plan?
Yeah, even though it's falling apart.
Or does he adapt?
Right.
And change his approach based on what's happening?
And admit that maybe things aren't going so well.
Yeah, it's a tough choice.
He chooses to adapt.
Wow, good for him.
He convinces Aang that they need to retreat.
Which means?
It means they have to wait to try to defeat the Fire Lord again.
And maybe end the war.
Exactly.
That's a hard decision.
This is a big moment for Sokka.
It shows that he's putting his team and the mission first.
Ahead of his own ego.
Yeah, and his desire to win.
That's a crucial lesson for any leader.
Knowing when to stick with the plan and when to be flexible.
Sometimes the smartest thing to do is to step back and reassess.
It's like that saying, sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war.
Exactly. And this idea of adaptability versus persistence comes up again in the Boiling Rock episodes.
Oh yeah, his dad.
Sokka's mission here is personal.
He's going to rescue his dad from this prison that's supposed to be inescapable.
Right.
He starts out with his usual determination and cleverness.
Makes sense.
He's got disguises, tools, a whole plan to get into the prison.
Nothing's stopping him.
But he runs into problems and setbacks.
Of course.
There's even a point where he's ready to give up.
It seems impossible.
Zuko, of all people, gives him a pep talk.
That's funny.
Zuko tells him, you have to try every time. You can't quit because you're afraid you might fail.
That's a great line.
It's about being resilient, bouncing back from setbacks.
Yeah, never giving up.
And this time, it's not just Sokka's own drive pushing him forward.
He's getting help from others.
He's getting strength from Zuko,
who's been through a lot himself.
And from his dad, Hakoda,
who's a great warrior and leader.
And there's that scene where Sokka asks Iroh about his destiny.
Oh, yeah.
That shows how much he's grown as a leader.
He's not afraid to ask for advice.
Yeah, even from people he used to consider enemies.
That's true humility.
Being willing to learn from anyone.
We often forget about that when we think about leadership.
Yeah.
We focus on the big actions, the inspiring speeches, but real leadership often involves quiet moments of reflection.
And admitting that you don't have all the answers.
It's like that proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
I love that.
Sokka is starting to understand that being a leader isn't about being a lone wolf.
It's about teamwork and collaboration.
And valuing different perspectives.
And all of these lessons lead up to the final battle against the Fire Nation.
The climate.
This is where we see Sokka using all the skills he's learned.
He is a true leader.
Okay, but before we get to the final battle,
Sure.
You said that sometimes persistence can actually be a bad thing.
Uh-huh.
How do you know when to keep pushing and when to change your approach?
That's a great question.
That's a tricky one.
There's no easy answer.
Every situation is different.
Right. The best way to handle things depends on the context.
But what are some things to think about?
Well, first, be honest with yourself about why you're doing what you're doing.
Okay.
Are you sticking with a plan just because it's what you always wanted?
Or because it's truly the best thing for everyone?
Sometimes our egos can get in the way of making the right decision,
It's easy to get attached to our own ideas.
even when they're not working anymore.
Second, listen to your team.
What are they saying?
Are they worried about something?
Are they running into problems you didn't expect?
A good leader is always open to hearing what other people think
That makes sense.
and using that information to make decisions.
It's like that idea of collective intelligence.
Yeah.
Using the knowledge and experience of the whole group.
And finally, don't be afraid to experiment and learn from your mistakes.
Sometimes the only way to know if something will work is to try it.
Right.
And if it doesn't work,
Then what?
don't be afraid to change course, learn from what happened, and try something new.
So it's not about being perfect.
Nope.
It's about being willing to try new things and adapt as you go.
Exactly. And that's a key part of Sokka's journey.
He makes mistakes, he tries things out, and he learns from both his successes and his failures.
And that's what helps him become a better leader.
Okay, so let's talk about that final battle.
The big one.
What are some moments that show Sokka's leadership?
For me, it's where everything we've been talking about comes together.
Like what?
We see his creativity when he invents those amazing weapons, like the airship slice.
Oh yeah, that was cool.
It shows he can think strategically and predict what the enemy will do.
He's always one step ahead.
We also see his bravery and selflessness when he saves Toph from getting crushed.
Oh, right.
He risks his own life to protect her.
That's brave.
And he never gives up fighting alongside his friends and family.
Even when it seems like they can't win.
Exactly. It's all of those things together. His creativity, his compassion, his courage, his resilience that make him such a strong leader in that battle.
Yeah, he's fighting for something bigger than himself.
He's fighting for the people he loves, for his tribe, for the whole world.
It's amazing to see how much he's changed since the beginning of the series.
From that insecure, kind of arrogant teenager.
He's become a true leader.
And it's all because he was willing to learn, to grow, and to put others before himself.
I love that the video essay points out that this didn't happen overnight.
It took time.
It was a gradual process with challenges and setbacks.
Ups and downs.
But Sokka never lost sight of his goals.
Or his commitment to his team.
And that's a really inspiring message for all of us.
Leadership is a journey, not a destination.
It's about always trying to improve.
And never giving up on yourself or the people you're leading.
So as we finish up our deep dive into Sokka's leadership journey,
what have we learned?
What are some things we can take away from this and use in our own lives? For me, I think the biggest thing is that you don't have to be perfect to be a leader.
It's about progress, not perfection.
It's about being open to learning and always trying to improve.
Sokka's a great example of that.
Totally.
I think anyone listening can relate to that.
Yeah, for sure.
We often think leaders have to be perfect, like they have all the answers and never make mistakes.
They're supposed to know everything.
Exactly. But Sokka's story shows us that real leaders are human.
Yeah, they make mistakes just like everyone else.
They mess up, they learn from it, and they become better because of it.
It's about being able to admit when you don't know something, asking for help, and changing your approach when you need to.
And don't forget about humor.
Oh yeah, Sokka's hilarious.
He's always making jokes.
But I think there's actually a lesson there.
About not taking yourself too seriously.
Yeah, finding the humor in things.
Especially when things are tough.
His humor isn't just about making people laugh, it's about connecting with them.
And making them feel more comfortable.
Yeah, like it can ease the tension.
Exactly. And that's a really important skill for a leader.
Creating a positive environment.
Especially when things are stressful.
It's about making people feel like they're all in it together.
And that they can get through anything.
So if you're thinking, well, I'm not a funny person.
Haha, you don't have to be a comedian.
Yeah, it's not about that.
It's about finding ways to bring a little bit of fun and positivity to your work.
Maybe tell a funny story.
Find the humor in everyday things.
Or just be able to laugh at yourself.
Those little moments of laughter can make a big difference.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Sokka's leadership journey.
What are some things we can take away from this?
Yeah, think about your own leadership style.
Where can you be more humble?
Who can you ask for advice from?
And how can you be both persistent and adaptable?
Knowing when to stick with your plan and when to try something new.
Remember, leadership is all about growth.
It's about learning and always trying to be better.
Sokka is a perfect example of that.
He shows us that anyone can be a leader.
It doesn't matter where you come from or what your experience is.
If you're willing to put in the work, you can achieve anything.
So keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring.
We're tackling strong female characters done right.
Okay.
And using Katara and Toph from Avatar as our prime examples. And, you sent over that YouTube video essay that really breaks down their strengths, flaws, and how their journeys offer like insightful lessons in character development.
Yeah.
I'm excited to unpack this with you.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how that video essay starts by kind of critiquing the whole trend of like modern strong women being portrayed as too perfect. And it argues that this lack of flaws can sometimes make them less relatable and honestly less interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's almost like they become these like one-dimensional superheroes.
Right.
Just solving every problem without breaking a sweat.
Exactly.
The essay even mentions, characters like Rey and Captain Marvel. I mean, they're undeniably powerful.
Yes.
But do they feel as human?
Right.
As relatable.
Yeah.
It definitely makes you wonder, like, what do you think about that?
I see what you mean. It's like their struggles aren't really struggles.
Right.
And that's where I think Katara and Toph shine.
Okay.
They're strong, they're capable, and yet they have these flaws,
Yeah.
vulnerabilities that make their growth feel so genuine.
Okay, let's dive into that.
Yeah.
So the video essay highlights Katara's, like, nurturing motherly nature, but also how that can sometimes become overbearing.
Yeah, I think the episode, The Runaway, really highlights this. Toph is clearly annoyed by Katara's mothering.
Yeah.
And even earlier, we see it in Battle of the Water Tribe.
Okay.
Katara's immediate distrust of Jet shows how her protectiveness, while it's well-intentioned, can lead to hasty judgments.
It's almost like her strength comes from a place of such deep caring.
Yes.
But that same caring can also lead to, like, conflict.
Exactly.
She wants to protect everyone, even from themselves.
Right.
Which isn't always the best approach.
Definitely not.
And then there's her unwavering hope, which, while admirable, can sometimes border on naivete.
I agree.
It's interesting to see how her faith in Zuko evolves over time, especially after he betrays their trust at the Western Air Temple.
Right.
That event really forces her to confront the reality that trust is something earned, not just freely given.
Absolutely.
That betrayal feels so personal, doesn't it?
It does.
It's like it cuts deeper than just a strategic setback.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how someone as hopeful as Katara can ever move past that kind of hurt.
Yeah, and that's what makes her journey of forgiveness so compelling. She has to grapple with those complex emotions, learn to forgive Zuko, and ultimately even herself for believing in him.
Yeah.
Her arc isn't about like blind optimism.
Okay.
It's about navigating the messiness of human relationships.
Yeah.
And finding a way to heal.
Then there's that incredibly powerful scene in the Southern Raiders where Katara chooses not to kill Yan-Ra, the man who murdered her mother.
It's a powerful scene.
That choice speaks volumes about her character.
It does.
What did you make of that scene?
I found it fascinating.
Okay.
The video essay brings up this quote from Tolkien about the king's hands being those of a healer.
Okay.
And I think that's a brilliant parallel. In that moment, Katara could have easily given in to her anger and desire for revenge, but she chooses a different path.
Okay.
A path of healing and mercy. It really underscores her strength as a healer, not just physically, but emotionally as well.
Speaking of strength, let's talk about Toph.
Okay.
This girl literally turns her blindness into an advantage.
I know, it's incredible.
That's incredible. What makes her portrayal so effective, in your opinion?
Well, the video essay touches on that Taoist principle of bending like a reed in the wind, adapting to circumstances.
Okay.
And Toph's blindness isn't just like a cool superpower. It's a testament to her resilience. She sees the world differently.
Yeah.
And that allows her to bend the earth in a way that no one else can.
And she's fiercely independent, right?
Oh, yeah.
The video essay talks about how her upbringing shaped her desire to prove that she could do everything on her own.
Right.
That I am who I am, take it or leave it attitude really resonates with me. It's empowering.
It is.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a great example of how even healthy independence can be taken too far. Remember how she initially resists Katara's attempts to care for her?
Yeah.
Or her struggles with sand bending in the library? Toph's used to dominating her environment.
Right.
But sand requires a different approach.
Okay.
More fluidity.
She even says in the tale of Toph and Katara,
Oh, yeah.
I don't care what I look like. I'm not looking for anyone's approval.
Yeah.
I know who I am.
Right.
It's clear she has a strong sense of self-worth.
Yeah, absolutely. But the key takeaway is that she eventually learns to accept help.
Oh.
Recognizing that true strength doesn't mean doing everything alone.
Yeah.
That scene in the finale where Sokka shields her from the falling debris is a powerful example of teamwork.
Okay.
It shows their growth both as individuals and as a team.
Yeah.
What stands out to you about that moment?
It really highlights how they both learn that relying on each other actually makes them stronger.
Yeah.
It doesn't diminish their individual strengths.
Right.
It enhances them.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point the video essay makes.
Really?
Femininity isn't about adhering to specific traits, but rather about the expression of virtues.
I love how the video contrasts motherly care with fatherly care, suggesting both can be expressions of the same virtues.
Right.
I find that perspective so refreshing.
It is.
What other virtues do you think Toph and Katara embody?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And how do those expressions challenge traditional notions of femininity?
That's such a great question. It really prompts us to think beyond the stereotypical definitions and appreciate the different ways strength and virtue can be expressed regardless of gender.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's like saying, hey, there's more than one way to be strong, to be compassionate, to be a leader.
Exactly.
And that message feels especially relevant when we think about how female characters are often portrayed.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? I completely agree. It's about embracing the diversity of human experience, recognizing that strength can manifest in countless forms. And both Katara and Toph exemplify this beautifully. They challenge those traditional notions of femininity by simply being themselves with all their complexities and contradictions.
Before we move on, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
You said that Toph's journey is about breaking free from limitations.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
What specific limitations is she overcoming?
Well, on a surface level, there's the obvious physical limitation of her blindness.
Right.
But Toph doesn't just overcome it.
Yeah.
She transforms it into her greatest asset.
Okay.
It's like she sees the world in a way that sighted people can't, and that gives her a unique understanding of earthbending.
It's fascinating how she uses her heightened senses to perceive vibrations in the earth.
Right.
Allowing her to see with her feet.
Exactly.
It's a powerful metaphor for finding strength in what others might perceive as weakness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And beyond the physical, Toph is also breaking free from the limitations imposed by her upbringing.
Right.
She was sheltered and coddled by her overprotective parents, treated as fragile and incapable.
Right.
But Toph knows she's anything but fragile.
Yeah.
Her journey is about claiming her independence, proving to herself and the world that she can handle anything life throws at her.
But her fierce independence can also be a double-edged sword.
It can.
In the beginning, she pushes people away, resists help, and struggles to function as part of a team.
Absolutely. Her need to prove herself, to show everyone that she doesn't need anyone, becomes a barrier to connection.
Okay.
And it's through those struggles, those clashes with her teammates, that Toph begins to realize that true strength lies not in isolation, but in connection.
And speaking of trust, let's revisit Katara's journey with Zuko.
Oh.
That betrayal at the Western Air Temple really shook her to her core.
It did.
It made me wonder if someone as hopeful as Katara could ever truly forgive him.
That's such a key moment in their relationship.
Yeah.
Zuko's betrayal isn't just a strategic setback for the group.
Right.
It's a deeply personal wound for Katara. It challenges her entire belief system, forcing her to re-examine the line between hope and naivete.
What's interesting is that even after that betrayal, A part of Katara still believes in Zuko's potential for good.
Yeah.
It's like she senses the internal conflict within him,
Right.
even when he's making terrible choices.
I think you're right. That moment in the Siege of the North, where she senses his turmoil during the invasion, is a pivotal one.
Okay.
It marks the beginning of her journey towards trusting him, a journey that's fraught with uncertainty and setbacks.
And it's not an easy journey.
No.
It takes time, patience, and a lot of hard work on Zuko's part to earn that trust back.
Absolutely.
But Katara's willingness to see the good in him, even when it's hard to find, ultimately paves the way for his redemption.
It speaks volumes about her character.
Yeah.
It shows that she's not just blindly optimistic.
Right.
She's willing to fight for the people she believes in, even when they make it difficult.
Yeah.
And that kind of unwavering belief can be incredibly powerful,
Okay.
both for the person giving it and the person receiving it.
Now, shifting gears a bit, I wanted to talk about Toph's struggles with sand bending.
Yeah.
The episode where she's trapped in the library with the sandbenders is a great example of how even the most skilled individuals can be pushed outside their comfort zone.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that episode?
I find it fascinating because it highlights Toph's adaptability.
Okay.
She's used to earthbending where the ground is solid and predictable,
Yeah.
but sand is fluid, constantly shifting.
Right.
It requires a completely different approach, a willingness to let go of control and move with the flow.
It's a humbling experience for her.
It is.
You can see her frustration as she struggles to grasp the technique, but she doesn't give up.
No.
She keeps practicing, observing, and eventually she starts to understand the nuances of sandbending.
And it's not just about mastering a new bending style.
Right.
It's a metaphor for life itself.
Okay.
We all encounter situations that challenge our preconceived notions, force us to adapt and learn new ways of being. Toph's determination to conquer sandbending is a testament to the power of perseverance
Okay.
and the importance of embracing change.
It also speaks to the importance of staying humble, of recognizing that we don't always have all the answers.
Yeah.
Toph, who's usually so confident and self-assured,
Yeah.
has to confront her own limitations in that episode.
Yes.
And it's through that confrontation that she ultimately grows.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that growth often happens outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's in those moments of struggle, of uncertainty, that we discover our true potential.
So we've talked about Katara's hope,
Right.
Toph's independence,
Yeah.
their struggles with trust and forgiveness. What do you think is the biggest takeaway for listeners
Okay.
when it comes to understanding what makes these characters so compelling?
I think it's the fact that they're allowed to be flawed,
But-
to make mistakes, to experience the full range of human emotion. They're not perfect role models. They're relatable characters who stumble, fall,
Yeah.
and pick themselves back up.
Okay.
And it's that vulnerability, that willingness to be imperfect that ultimately makes them so strong and inspiring.
I couldn't agree more. It's like their imperfections make their strengths shine even brighter.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like we can see ourselves in their struggles, you know? We connect with their vulnerabilities
Right.
and celebrate their triumphs
Yeah.
because they feel earned.
They do.
It's a stark contrast to those flawless characters. The video essay critiques.
I think that's the point the essay is driving at.
Yeah.
By striving for flawlessness. We sometimes end up with characters that feel less real,
Yeah.
less relatable.
Less human almost.
Yeah.
Their victories might be impressive,
Right.
but do they resonate on an emotional level?
Exactly.
It's like we're told aspire to be like this character, but when that character never stumbles,
Right.
never doubts,
Yeah.
it can feel more discouraging than inspiring.
It sets an impossible standard.
It becomes a performance of strength rather than an authentic journey.
Yeah.
With Katara and Toph, we see their growth.
Right.
We understand the choices they make,
Okay.
even the bad ones,
Yeah.
because we see the emotions, the doubts, the internal struggles that drive those choices.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
what are your final thoughts on what we can learn from Katara and Toph? What makes them such strong,
Yeah.
well-written female characters?
Well, firstly, they challenge our preconceived notions of strength and femininity. They show us that those qualities aren't bound by gender stereotypes. Katara's compassion and nurturing spirit are just as powerful as
Right.
Toph's fierce independence and earthbending prowess.
And they both demonstrate that true strength isn't about being perfect or invincible.
Right.
It's about resilience,
Yes.
the ability to adapt and overcome challenges,
Yeah.
even when it's hard.
Exactly. And I think the biggest takeaway is that it's okay to be flawed. It's our imperfections, our vulnerabilities
Yeah.
that make us human.
Yeah.
And it's through those imperfections that we learn, grow, and ultimately become stronger versions of ourselves.
I love that. It's like they're saying, embrace your flaws, learn from your mistakes,
Yeah.
and never give up on yourself.
Exactly.
And those are pretty powerful messages.
They are.
No matter who you are.
Absolutely.
But I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
We've been talking about fictional characters.
Right.
But how can we apply these lessons to our own lives? What other characters, real or imagined, embody these qualities?
That's a great question.
This deep dive is just the beginning.
It is.
Keep exploring, keep questioning,
Yeah.
and keep embracing the beautiful complexity of being human.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Our deep dive into the world of Avatar and specifically the character of Aang. Now we're going to go way beyond the surface level. And I'm really excited to kind of dig in and see what makes him tick, you know?
Yeah.
We've got 3 video essays that we're going to be using as source material. And what I think is interesting is they're not your typical like plot recaps. Each of them takes a different angle on Aang's personality, his struggles, and even the philosophy behind his bending style.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really fascinating approach, I think. And I think it'll really help us see Aang in a whole new light. And one of the things that really struck me was how these essays really kind of dug into the multiple sides of his personality. So you've got, you've got Aang, the fun-loving kid. You've got Aang, the spiritual heir, nomad monk. And then you've got Aang, the avatar destined to save the world.
Right. How do those 3 sides even coexist? Talk about pressure. He's only 12 years old chronologically, but he's carrying the weight of a century-old war and the fate of the entire world on his shoulders. How does the show even balance that?
That's the paradox, isn't it? I mean, one minute he's, riding a giant panda with his friends. The next minute he's facing down a firebending master. And I think the show does a brilliant job of showing both sides of Aang. They don't shy away from the fact that he's still a kid and, wants to have fun even while carrying this immense responsibility.
Yeah. It's that tension that makes his character so relatable, don't you think? I mean, who hasn't felt that pull between wanting to just like enjoy life?
Yeah.
And having to deal with serious stuff, maybe not on the scale of like saving the world or whatever, but those feelings of pressure and responsibility I think are universal.
Absolutely. And one of the essays actually uses this great term to describe Aang, immature maturity, which I thought was just such a perfect way to capture the complexities of his character.
Yeah. What does that even mean? Immature maturity?
Well, hey, think about it. He has this incredible moral compass, deep empathy, and a profound understanding of spirituality. All these qualities you might associate with someone much older and wiser.
Right, so he's got this like wise old soul thing going on. But
he's also impulsive and he's playful and he craves connection like any 12-year-old. It's not that one side is right or wrong. It's really the interplay between these different aspects of his personality that kind of drive his decisions.
Right, like when he runs away.
Yeah.
After finding out he's the avatar.
Exactly. I mean, that was a classic example of his immature maturity, like a completely understandable reaction for a child who's been thrust into such a monumental role. But it also highlighted this inner conflict that he was facing. And throughout the series, you see how those different sides of his personality, the kid, the monk, the avatar, they all shape his actions and his relationships.
Yeah, it makes him feel so real, so human. And speaking of things that shape Aang, one of the essays made this point that really surprised me. They argued that earth bending, not fire bending, was the most crucial element for his development.
That's interesting, isn't it? You would think fire bending, the element of the enemy, would be the biggest challenge for him to overcome.
Right, exactly. But the argument is that earth bending, with its focus on, being grounded, patient and resilient, was actually a lot harder for Aang to grasp, because he's an airbender, all about freedom and going with the flow.
Right. It's like trying to teach a bird to burrow, His natural instinct is to evade and move around obstacles, but earthbending requires him to stand firm, to be unwavering.
Yeah. His training with Toph was like a perfect example, like Clash of Styles. She's all about tough love, pushing him to confront his weaknesses head on.
Right. And remember how frustrating those early sessions were for Aang. He was so used to bending being, intuitive and almost effortless. But earthbending forced him to slow down, to be deliberate, to connect with that, unyielding nature of the earth. And I think there's a powerful lesson there for all of us. Think about a time when you felt overwhelmed or tempted to give up on something. What if you channeled a bit of that earthbending spirit and just stood your ground?
Yeah, that's a great point. Instead of avoiding challenges, we can learn to face them head on with that same grounded energy.
Exactly. And Aang's journey shows us that. Sometimes the strongest stance isn't about running away or fighting back. It's about finding that inner resilience to meet the challenge head on.
And that resilience becomes essential when he faces his biggest moral dilemma, whether or not to kill Fire Lord Ozai. All 3 essays really dug into this decision, and there were some strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting, because Aang is a pacifist air nomad monk. Taking a life goes against everything he believes in. So the show doesn't present this as a simple choice. It really explores, all the complexities and different perspectives surrounding his decision to spare Ozai's life. What really stood out to you in those discussions?
Well, one argument was that Aang's decision was kind of selfish. What if he'd failed to find another way? What if he had died trying to subdue Ozai? Without ending his life, the consequences could have been devastating.
Right. So did he prioritize his own moral code over the safety of the world? That's a pretty heavy accusation.
Right. But then there's the counter argument. By finding another way, Aang not only stayed true to his principles, but he also demonstrated incredible compassion and creativity. He showed that even in the face of pure evil, there's always another option. He proved that even the most powerful bender in the world can choose a path of peace.
It's such a powerful statement about pacifism, about justice, and about believing that even when things seem impossible, there's always another way.
It's not just about Ozai, though, is it? It's about the burden of leadership that Aang carries. His decisions don't just affect him, they affect the entire world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Aang's journey so compelling. It's this constant struggle between his personal beliefs and the demands of his role as the Avatar. He's not just fighting external enemies, he's battling his own doubt, his own fears. And that's something I think we can all relate to. It's really fascinating to me how these essays kind of go beyond just analyzing Aang's choices, but they actually connect them to like real world philosophical ideas. Like, this whole debate about whether or not to kill Ozai, it's something that people have grappled with for centuries. Like, when is violence justified? Can there truly be peace without sacrifice? These are big questions. And it's amazing how the show uses Aang's story to explore them.
It's like Avatar is giving us this framework for thinking about these complex ethical issues, but it also offers like some really personal lessons too. One of the essays talked about how the different sides of Aang, like the monk, the Avatar, the 12-year-old, are like these stages of maturity that we all go through in life. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant observation, and you can actually see it play out throughout the series. Early on, it's like the monk side of Aang that's dominant. He's all about peace, detachment from worldly concerns, and finding enlightenment. But as he faces the realities of war and loss, that perspective starts to shift.
So that like youthful idealism gets challenged by the harsh realities of the world.
Exactly. He realizes that just detaching himself from the world's problems isn't enough. He has a responsibility to act, to engage, even if it means like confronting difficult emotions and making tough choices. And that's where I think the Avatar side of his personality starts to emerge. It represents like a more mature, balanced perspective.
So the Avatar side is about accepting the weight of leadership, the consequences of his actions, and the fact that there aren't always easy answers.
Precisely. And it's not always a smooth transition. Remember when Aang learns that to master the Avatar state, he might have to let go of his attachment to Katara. That was a heart-wrenching moment. Talk about a tough choice. Giving up love for the sake of duty. It's like a classic heroic dilemma.
Yeah, it speaks to the sacrifices
that
we sometimes have to make as we grow up. Sometimes putting the needs of others first means setting aside our own desires, even when it hurts.
Exactly. But even as Anyang matures and takes on more responsibility, he never completely loses that youthful spirit. The 12-year-old part of him, the one who loves fun and adventure, is always there, bringing a touch of lightness to even the darkest moments.
Yeah. It's that balance, isn't it? The ability to be serious and responsible while still holding on to that sense of joy and wonder.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so endearing and relatable. He's not some like stoic, perfect hero. He's a kid who's trying to figure things out as he goes, just like the rest of us. And I think those moments of joy are even more powerful because they exist alongside the heavier themes of the show. Remember when he creates that zoo in Ba Sing Se?
Of course. Only Aang could start a revolution by setting animals loose.
Right. It's such a classic Aang moment. It's a reminder that even in the midst of tragedy and conflict, there's still room for laughter and kindness. And that's a powerful message, isn't it? Even when things are tough, we don't have to lose our sense of fun.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Aang such an inspiring character. He shows us that it's okay to embrace the full spectrum of human experience. It's okay to grease, to feel angry, to make mistakes, but it's also crucial to hold on to that inner child, that sense of wonder and playfulness that keeps us going.
And to remember that, even when we feel lost or overwhelmed, there's always a path forward. Sometimes it means like embracing our fears and standing our ground, like an earthbender. Other times it means being adaptable and flowing with the current, like a waterbender.
And sometimes it means just taking a moment to appreciate the simple things, to find joy in the unexpected. Just like Aang does time and time again, his journey isn't just about saving the world. It's about rediscovering what it means to be human, to live fully in the present moment, and to never give up hope, even when all seems lost.
Beautifully said. It's a journey that resonates with us, long after the final credits roll. And one of the things that makes it so compelling is that Aang never stops learning. He's constantly evolving, adapting to new challenges, and questioning his own assumptions.
That's something we can all aspire to, right? To keep that spark of curiosity alive, to never stop growing and learning, no matter how old we get.
Absolutely. And in a world that often feels divided and uncertain, Aang's journey reminds us of the power of empathy, of understanding different perspectives, and of seeking common ground. He's a master of bridging divides, bringing people together, and finding those unexpected connections that transcend differences.
And in a way, that's his greatest superpower, wouldn't you say? Not just bending the elements, but bending hearts and minds, inspiring others to believe in a better future.
Exactly. That's the legacy he leaves behind, and it's a powerful one. It's about hope, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's always light to be found.
It's amazing how even years after watching the show, these essays can make you re-examine Aang's journey and find these new layers of meaning. It really is remarkable how much depth there is to Aang's story. And one thing that all three essays really emphasized was that Aang's ultimate victory wasn't just about defeating the Fire Lord, but it was about staying true to himself. Even when everyone was telling him he had to kill Ozai, he found another way.
Yeah, and what's so inspiring about that is he never wavered in his beliefs. He clung to, his faith in peace and compassion, even when it seemed impossible. And that's what makes his final confrontation with Ozai so incredibly powerful. He's not just fighting for the world, he's fighting for his soul.
And remember how differently he approaches that final battle. It's not the same impulsive Aang we saw in earlier seasons. He's so calm, so deliberate, almost like he's anticipating Ozai's every move. Do you think his mastery of earthbending played a role in that?
Oh, absolutely. It's like all that training with Toph, learning to be grounded and face his opponent head on, it all culminated in that moment. He's learned to channel that earthbending energy, that unshakable inner strength.
He's not the flighty-air nomad who runs from conflict anymore. He's a force to be reckoned with, capable of meeting the most powerful firebender in the world on equal footing. And it's not just physical strength, is it?
No, it's so much more than that. It's about mental and emotional resilience. He's able to control the avatar state, to harness its immense power without being consumed by rage or despair. That's a testament to his growth and his spiritual maturity. He's learned to balance all those different aspects of himself, the monk, the avatar, the 12-year-old. And it's that harmony that allows him to triumph in the end.
It's such a beautiful arc. It's not just about Aang saving the world. It's about him saving himself. He stays true to his values, finds a path to peace, and emerges from this epic journey a more complete and enlightened individual, but a powerful message for all of us.
It really is. Aang's journey reminds us that even when we're faced with seemingly impossible choices, even when the world tells us there's only one way forward, we have the power to choose a different path.
So what does this all mean for you listening? What can we take away from Aang's story? I think it's about the power of holding on to our beliefs, of finding balance within ourselves, and of never giving up hope even when all seems lost.
It's about recognizing the importance of empathy, compassion, and understanding. And it's about believing that even in a world filled with conflict and darkness, there's always a chance for peace, for healing, and for a brighter future.
We've covered so much in this deep dive, and I want to leave you with one final thought. If you were in Aang's position, facing that impossible choice, how would you balance the desire for personal happiness with the responsibility to save the world? It's something to ponder, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's a testament to the power of Aang's story, that it continues to spark these kinds of questions, these deep reflections, on what it means to be human, to be compassionate, and to make a difference in the world.
Well said.
We are talking about something that I think is really fascinating. We talk a lot about, what makes good entertainment.
Yeah.
And the thing that always kind of gets me is how does something stay good for a long time?
Right.
We've got this source material and it's talking about a show that has managed to stay, relevant and popular for over 20 years.
Really popular. Yeah.
Yeah. So, just off the top of your head, do you have any shows that you can think of that have had that kind of staying power?
Oh, tons. The Simpsons, for example.
Right.
That's been going on for, it seems like forever.
Yeah. And it's still,
It's going.
It's still funny. It's still relevant.
Yeah.
So it's what is it about something like that lets it just keep going?
The source really hit on something that I think is super important. It's that connection with the fans. And I think that's what keeps people coming back. It's not just, passively watching something week to week or whatever. It's that feeling of community.
Yeah. How do they do that?
Well, for this particular show, they do a really great job of engaging with fans online.
Yeah.
They take feedback. Sometimes they even feature fan art and stuff in the actual episodes,
That's cool.
So it's they're really giving fans a sense of ownership in the show.
Yeah, I like that.
Which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, because then you feel like you're a part of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not just like a thing you watch.
Yeah, and you feel more invested in it. Like you want to see it succeed.
Right. Exactly.
You know, because it's partially yours in a way.
So that's like a whole community thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the source material also talks about this idea of like compelling storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another thing that kind of jumped out at me because I think we all know a good story when we see it.
Totally.
But what makes this particular show's storytelling so good?
Yeah, I think it's like a two-pronged thing. It's the character arcs are really rich and the plots are super intricate.
Okay.
You know, the source goes into how each character has like these really difficult dilemmas that they have to face.
Oh, interesting.
So you're not just watching like a surface level story. You're really seeing these characters grow and change and make tough choices that I think a lot of people can relate to in their own lives.
Yeah, so it's like you're kind of living through the characters a little bit.
Totally, yeah.
It's not just like...
They're like a reflection of ourselves in a way.
Totally. Okay, so that's the character side of things.
Yeah.
What about the plot?
Well, the source talks about how they weave all these different storylines together.
Okay.
And they always keep you guessing. Like, you never know what's going to happen next. The stakes are always really high. And that kind of unpredictability is what keeps people, like, on the edge of their seat, you know, week after week, year after year.
But, okay, so you've got the community aspect.
Mm-hmm.
You've got this great storytelling, but how do they keep from getting stale? I mean, 20 years is a long time.
That is a long time. And I think this is where adaptability really comes in.
Yeah.
You know, they're not afraid to like introduce new characters, shake things up a little bit.
Interesting.
But at the same time, they always stay true to the core themes of the show.
Yeah, so it's like they're evolving, but they're not like abandoning what made them good in the first place.
Exactly. They're striking that balance.
Okay, I like that.
Of staying fresh while staying true to themselves.
I think that's a really important distinction.
It is, yeah.
So the source actually calls this show a part of cultural history.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty big statement.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think? Like, what does a show like this tell us about ourselves and about our culture?
I think it shows that we're drawn to these stories that deal with, you know, complex characters and like moral dilemmas and the search for connection.
Yeah, it's been going on for so long.
Right. And it's touched so many different generations.
It's not just like a one-off.
It's like something about it is just universally appealing.
Right. So it must be tapping into something pretty fundamental about like...
Exactly. It's like a reflection of the human experience in a way.
The human experience. Yeah, I love that.
You know.
So the source material seems to be pretty optimistic about the future of this show.
Yeah, they are.
What do you think? Why do they think it can keep going?
I mean, for one, the creators are clearly still really passionate about it.
Okay.
They're still willing to experiment and try new things. And most importantly, they really seem to understand their audience.
Right.
They know what the fans want and they're not afraid to give it to them.
So it sounds like we've kind of got like a three-part recipe here.
Yeah.
For making something that lasts.
Yeah.
You know, this fan connection.
Right.
This compelling storytelling and this adaptability.
Exactly. Those are the key ingredients.
I mean, that's a lot to think about.
It is. And, you know, it makes me wonder what other factors beyond those might be at play here.
Ooh, that's a good question.
What do you think?
Yeah, like what else might contribute to a show's ability to stay relevant and captivating for, you know, decades potentially?
Yeah, like what are we missing here? What other secrets are there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm going to have to think about that one for a while.
Me too.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about, you know, what makes entertainment timeless. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of inspired now to go back and revisit some of my favorite shows.
Totally.
And kind of see if I can spot these elements at play.
Yeah, see if you can find the secret sauce.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
And until next time, keep exploring.
Keep watching.